After a brutal decade of corporate auditing, I finally quit my high-pressure job to heal and bought my absolute dream beach house in Malibu. It was supposed to be my secret sanctuary, but on my very first night, as I sat on the balcony listening to the waves, my phone lit up with a call from my mother. Her voice was dripping with that familiar entitled smugness. "We sold our house today," she announced casually. "We are moving in tomorrow. Your dad said it is perfectly fine." Before I could even process the audacity, she delivered the final blow. "And if you do not like it, you can find somewhere else to live." My hands shook, not from fear, but from a cold, calculating rage. I did not scream or argue. I just smiled, looking down at the heavy stack of legal documents on my patio table. I prepared a massive surprise for their arrival. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who tried to take everything from you. My name is Gemma, 34 years old, and I spent my entire adult life running away from the suffocating expectations of my family. I built a highly successful career as a corporate auditor in Chicago, dissecting complex financial fraud, analyzing offshore accounts, and tearing down white-collar criminals. The money was incredible, but the stress was a slow poison. My days were filled with endless spreadsheets, corporate espionage, and constant flights across the country. But the real exhaustion did not come from the boardrooms. It came from my family back in California. For as long as I can remember, my parents, Barbara and Richard, treated me like a human ATM and a permanent backup plan. In their eyes, I was merely the financial safety net for their precious golden child, my younger brother, Preston. Preston is 31 years old, perpetually unemployed, and full of brilliant startup ideas that mysteriously require hundreds of thousands of dollars in seed money. That money inevitably disappears into his gambling debts and lavish lifestyle. Every time he failed, Barbara and Richard expected me to swoop in and cover his massive losses. They would call me at 2 o'clock in the morning, demanding I wire funds to save the family reputation. I finally decided that enough was enough. The intense stress of my career, combined with their constant emotional and financial extortion, pushed me to the brink of a massive burnout. So, I walked away from it all. I resigned from my prestigious firm, collected a substantial severance package, cashed out my stock options, and decided it was time to put my own mental health first. I wanted peace. I wanted the ocean. I wanted a place where my family could not find me, could not drain my bank accounts, and could not demand a spare bedroom. That is when I found the Malibu Beach House. It was a stunning architectural masterpiece. 4 massive bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, a wraparound cedar deck, and a private wooden staircase leading straight down to the pristine sand. It cost a small fortune, but I had worked 80-hour weeks for 10 long years. I earned it, because I audit financial structures for a living. I know exactly how to hide high-value assets. I did not buy the house under my own personal name. I created a completely anonymous limited liability company called Ocean Crest Holdings. Only my trust attorney and I knew that I was the sole owner and primary shareholder of the corporation. To the outside world, I was just an ordinary tenant renting a luxury property from a faceless corporate entity. It was the absolute perfect shield against my parasitic parents. I packed up my entire life in Chicago, drove my golden retriever across the country, and moved into my new sanctuary. The first evening, there was pure magic. The salty ocean air filled my lungs, washing away a decade of corporate anxiety. I poured myself a glass of expensive red wine, sat on the plush outdoor sofa, and listened to the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the shore. I felt completely free and untouchable, but that beautiful freedom lasted exactly 3 hours. My phone started ringing around 8 o'clock. The caller ID flashed with my mother's name. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but a lingering sense of daughterly obligation made me swipe to accept the call. I expected her usual complaints about her country club friends, or another subtle hint about Preston needing emergency cash for his latest foolish venture. I was completely unprepared for the terrifying reality of her words. "Gemma," she said, not bothering to ask how my cross-country move went or how I was recovering from my resignation. "Your father and I have incredible news. We just closed on the sale of our house today. The buyers gave us a fantastic cash offer and we simply could not refuse." I frowned, taking a slow sip of my wine. "That is a huge decision." "Mom, where are you going to live?" She let out a high-pitched, dismissive laugh that grated against my nerves. "Why? With you. Of course. Preston handled everything. He found out you moved to a beach house in Malibu. We are packing the moving truck tonight, and we will be arriving tomorrow morning. Your dad said it is perfectly fine since the house has 4 bedrooms. We are taking the master suite, obviously, since we are the parents." I sat frozen in my patio chair. My mind scrambled to make sense of what she was saying. How did they even know I was in Malibu? I had been meticulously careful about my privacy. I had not posted anything on social media. I had not updated my forwarding address with anyone but the Postal Service. "Mom, you cannot just move into my house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and calm. "I moved here to be completely alone. I need space to recover from my stressful job. You and Dad cannot just show up and claim my master bedroom." Her tone immediately shifted from falsely cheerful to ice cold. "Stop being so incredibly selfish. Gemma, we sold our home to help your brother with a very important investment. We need a place to stay and you have plenty of room. Preston already arranged everything. He is so smart taking care of his parents like this." The mere mention of Preston sent a massive red flag shooting up in my mind. Preston never did anything out of the goodness of his heart. And he certainly never handled legitimate real estate transactions. "This is my house," I repeated, my grip tightening dangerously on the delicate stem of my wine glass. "You are not moving in here." Barbara scoffed loudly into the receiver. "Do not be ridiculous. We are arriving at 9 o'clock in the morning, and if you do not like it, you can find somewhere else to live. We are family, and family helps family. See you tomorrow." The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone, staring out at the dark, vast ocean. My hands began to shake. But the tremor had nothing to do with sadness or panic. It was pure, unadulterated fury. My own mother had just threatened to kick me out of my own home. But as the hot anger washed over me, my cold, calculating corporate auditor instincts kicked into high gear. I opened my laptop and pulled up the encrypted digital files for Ocean Crest Holdings. I stared at the stamped legal documents proving my absolute, undeniable ownership of this million-dollar property. I did not know what kind of a legal scam my brother was running or what ridiculous lies he had told my parents to get their money. But I knew one thing for certain. They were walking straight into a legal trap, and I was going to gladly snap it shut. The morning sun crested over the Pacific Ocean, casting a brilliant golden light across the hardwood floors of my living room. I had barely slept, fueled by a dangerous mix of adrenaline and espresso. My golden retriever Bailey paced nervously by the glass doors, sensing the shift in my energy. I stood on the deck in my silk robe, gripping a fresh mug of coffee, watching the private access road that wound down the cliffside toward my property. At exactly 9 o'clock, the heavy rumble of a diesel engine shattered the coastal peace. A massive white moving truck barreled down the narrow driveway, entirely ignoring the posted private property signs. Right behind it was a gleaming black luxury SUV that I instantly recognized. It was the car my parents had bought last year, using funds they claimed they needed for emergency medical expenses. The vehicle slammed into park on my crushed stone driveway. The SUV doors swung open and my family stepped out like they owned the entire coastline. Barbara emerged first, wearing an oversized sun hat, and a floral resort dress already pointing and giving sharp orders to the bewildered moving crew. Richard followed, hiking up his golf pants, looking around with a smug, evaluating gaze, as if he were inspecting a new hotel acquisition. And then came Preston. My 31-year-old brother stepped out of the driver's seat wearing designer sunglasses and a smug grin that made my blood boil. He looked entirely too pleased with himself, strutting around the luxury cars like a newly minted billionaire. I set my coffee mug on the patio table, took a deep breath of the salty air, and walked down the cedar steps to meet them. Bailey trotted faithfully at my side, letting out a low, warning growl as we approached the driveway. "Gemma," my mother announced loudly, not offering a hug or even a polite greeting. "Good you are awake. Tell the movers which room is yours. We need them to clear it out immediately so they can bring in the new master bedroom suite we just bought. I hope you have started packing your things. We are on a very tight schedule today." I stood my ground at the bottom of the stairs, crossing my arms over my chest. "I told you on the phone last night, Mom, you are not moving in here. Turn the truck around." Richard let out a heavy sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose like I was a stubborn toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. "Do not start this nonsense today, Gemma. We have been dealing with real estate agents and bankers all week. We are exhausted. We sold the family house to fund Preston's new tech venture, and we need this space. You have been unemployed for weeks now. You have plenty of free time to pack a bag and find a cheap apartment in the city." "Unemployed," I repeated, my voice deadly calm. I resigned from a senior director position at a global auditing firm because I was burning out from constantly bailing this family out of debt. I am taking a planned sabbatical. I am not unemployed, and I am certainly not giving up my home so Preston can fund another imaginary startup." Preston scoffed, pushing his designer sunglasses up onto his perfectly styled hair. He sauntered over to me, looking me up and down with absolute disdain. "Oh, please. You quit your job because you could not handle the pressure. Now you are just squatting in some corporate rental property pretending you are rich. It is pathetic. Honestly, you are 34 years old, single, and jobless. It is time to step aside and let the real adults handle the family business." I stared at him, marveling at his pure, unadulterated delusion. "The real adults," I said slowly. "You mean the adult who has never held a job for more than 6 months? The adult who lost $50,000 in Vegas last year and begged Mom to steal from my college savings account to cover it?" Preston's face flushed a deep, angry red. That was a temporary cash flow issue. My new venture is going to revolutionize the market. Dad and Mom believe in me. That is why they sold the house. They know a solid investment when they see one. And this house. I gestured to the stunning modern architecture behind me. "How exactly does moving into a luxury Malibu beach house factor into your brilliant startup plan?" Barbara stepped between us, aggressively waving her manicured hands. "That is none of your concern." "Gemma." "Preston brokered a brilliant deal for us. He found this property, negotiated with the holding company, and secured it for us. We are the new owners. So, stop acting like a jealous, bitter spinster and go pack your bags. The movers are charging us by the hour." I looked at the moving crew. 3 burly men in matching uniforms were standing by the back of their truck, looking extremely uncomfortable as they witnessed our vicious family drama unfold on the driveway. They had not unloaded a single box yet, sensing the explosive tension in the air. "Nobody is unloading anything," I announced loudly, making sure the movers heard me clearly. "Because nobody is moving in. This property belongs to me. I am the legal tenant, and you are all trespassing." Richard stepped forward, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. He pointed a thick accusatory finger directly at my chest. "Listen to me very carefully. Young lady, you do not own anything. You threw away a $200,000 salary to come out here and play the victim. You do not get to dictate terms to us. We just paid $1.5 million for this exact property. We own the ground you are standing on. I blinked, genuinely stunned by the number Richard had just confidently shouted at me. $1.5 million. That was exactly what their old suburban house was worth. They had liquidated their entire life savings, their primary residence, everything they had spent 40 years building. And they had given every single penny to Preston. "You bought this house?" I asked, keeping my tone deceptively flat, letting the sheer absurdity of the situation wash over me. "You bought a luxury Malibu beachfront property for $1.5 million. The empty lot next door just sold for $3 million. Do you really think someone sold you this fully furnished architectural estate for half the price of dirt?" Preston stepped directly into my personal space, invading my boundaries, trying to use his height to intimidate me. He sneered a nasty, victorious smirk twisting his features. That is the beauty of having a smart son. Gemma, I found a highly motivated corporate seller who needed to liquidate assets immediately. I negotiated a private off-market cash deal. It is called being a brilliant businessman. Something you would not understand since all you do is look at other people's spreadsheets all day. Now I am telling you for the last time. Go inside, pack your cheap clothes, take your dog, and get off our property before I call the cops and have you physically removed for trespassing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a steady, rhythmic beat of impending warfare. I was staring at a man who had not just lied to our parents, but had orchestrated a massive federal-level financial crime against his own flesh and blood. He had stolen their entire life savings under the guise of an impossible real estate transaction, leaving them functionally homeless, all while trying to violently evict me from a house I secretly owned. I looked at my mother, who was glaring at me with pure hatred, and my father, who looked ready to physically throw me out into the street. They had chosen their golden child. They had handed him their entire future on a silver platter, and they were perfectly happy to throw me to the wolves to facilitate his lies. The pain of their betrayal was quickly eclipsed by the icy, calculating logic of my profession. If they wanted to play hardball over a real estate contract, I was going to give them a masterclass in corporate warfare. I held Preston's gaze, refusing to back down a single inch. "Call them," I challenged quietly. "Call the police right now. Preston, let us see exactly who gets escorted off this property in handcuffs." Preston let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed off the exterior walls of the house. He did not reach for his phone. Instead, he shoved past me, marching up the cedar steps and straight through the open glass doors into my kitchen. Barbara and Richard followed him like obedient ducklings, stepping over the threshold of a house they mistakenly believed they owned. I turned and followed them inside, commanding Bailey to stay close to my side. The moment I stepped into my own kitchen, Preston aggressively unzipped a sleek leather portfolio he had brought from the luxury SUV. He pulled out a thick stack of papers bound by a heavy black clip and slammed them triumphantly onto the pristine marble countertop. "Read it and weep, Gemma," Preston said, his voice dripping with condescension. He tapped a manicured finger against the top page. The official deed of transfer. $1.5 million paid in full. Signed, sealed, and legally binding. We are the owners of Ocean Crest Holdings properties now. So, stop stalling and start packing. I walked slowly toward the kitchen island. My heart maintained its steady analytical rhythm. 10 years of scrutinizing fraudulent corporate documents, uncovering embezzled funds, and hunting down phantom shell companies had prepared me for this exact moment. I did not touch the paperwork immediately. I simply leaned over the counter and let my eyes scan the top sheet. It was supposed to be a standard California grant deed. To the untrained eye, to my desperate and gullible parents, it probably looked incredibly official. It had a fancy border, bold typography, and a gold foil seal pressed into the bottom right corner. But to a former senior auditor, It was a hilariously amateurish forgery. It looked like something a college freshman would create for a fake identification card using a basic graphic design template downloaded from the internet. My eyes cataloged the glaring errors with clinical precision. First, the formatting was entirely wrong for Los Angeles County real estate recordings. The margins did not meet the mandatory recording requirements, and the assessor parcel number was missing 2 entire digits. Second, the font used for the official county clerk header was Arial, a standard system font, instead of the proprietary serif typeface utilized by the actual municipal office. It was a sloppy oversight that screamed amateur hour. But the most damning evidence was the signature block. The document claimed the property was transferred by the authorized managing member of Ocean Crest Holdings, LLC. Below that title was a wildly looping, illegible signature belonging to a fictional man named David Thorne. I almost laughed out loud. Ocean Crest Holdings, LLC had exactly one authorized managing member. Me. There was no David Thorne anywhere in my corporate paperwork. Preston had literally invented a phantom executive to sign over a house that I owned. I leaned closer, examining the gold foil seal. It was not embossed. It was just a flat, glossy sticker you could buy in bulk at any local office supply store. There was no raised notary stamp, no legitimate number, and the notary signature was dated on a Sunday. A day when county recording offices are strictly closed. Is there a problem with your reading comprehension? Barbara snapped, crossing her arms as she stood next to her precious son. The document is perfectly clear. Preston negotiated directly with the holding company executives. He saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars in broker fees by handling the transaction privately. I shifted from the fake deed to my mother. You gave him the money directly, I asked, keeping my tone perfectly level despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. You transferred your entire life savings to Preston so he could handle this private transaction. Richard puffed out his chest, stepping forward to defend the golden child. Of course we did. Preston set up a secure escrow account to facilitate the wire transfer. The money went straight to Ocean Crest Holdings. We received the confirmation receipt yesterday morning before we packed the truck. My son is a financial genius. You should be taking notes instead of standing there looking foolish. A secure escrow account. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. I looked back down at the portfolio. Peeking out from beneath the fake deed was a printed wire transfer confirmation. I reached out and slid it from under the heavy clip before Preston could stop me. Hey! Put that down! Preston barked, lunging forward to snatch it back. But I had already seen enough. The routing number on the wire transfer receipt did not belong to a licensed California escrow company. It did not even belong to a domestic bank. The 9-digit sequence was a routing code for a notorious offshore banking institution based in the Cayman Islands. It was a bank heavily favored by online gambling syndicates and unregulated cryptocurrency exchanges. Preston had not paid a single dime to Ocean Crest Holdings, LLC. I knew that for an absolute fact because my corporate bank accounts had a balance of 0 incoming transfers. He had convinced our parents to liquidate their entire suburban home. Convinced them to wire $1, $5 million into a fake offshore escrow account he controlled, and then printed out a fake deed from the internet to prove he bought them a Malibu beach house. He had stolen their entire future to fund his gambling debts and offshore vices, leaving them completely destitute and functionally homeless. And he had chosen my specific rental house to use as his fake purchase because he thought I was just a broke, powerless tenant who could be easily bullied into leaving. He had no idea that he had just attempted real estate fraud on the actual owner of the holding company. I slowly set the wire transfer receipt back on the marble counter. I looked at Preston. His smug confidence was still plastered across his face, but I could see the tiny beads of sweat forming along his hairline. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but he was arrogant enough to believe he had already won. He genuinely thought I was going to pack my bags and run away, crying. leaving him to deal with the fallout whenever the real owner supposedly showed up. He assumed my silence was defeat. "Well," Richard demanded, slamming his hand flat against the countertop. "Are you done playing lawyer? You have seen the proof. The house is ours. Now go upstairs, pack your bags, and get out of my house." I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of fear. I simply picked up my coffee mug, took a calm sip, and looked my father dead in the eye. "I am not going anywhere. Richard, that piece of paper is completely worthless." Barbara let out a dramatic gasp, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. "You ungrateful wretch, girl. We are your parents. We own this property now. How dare you defy us?" Preston's face darkened with genuine malice. He stepped closer, his fists clenched at his sides. "I warned you outside. Gemma, you are trespassing. You do not own this place and you do not have any right to stay here. We are the legal owners. If you do not walk out that front door right now, we are going to have you forcibly removed." I stood my ground, my eyes locked on his. The air in the kitchen grew thick with tension. This was the moment of no return. I was staring at my family, a group of people who had completely discarded me in favor of a son who was currently robbing them blind. They had willingly handed over everything they owned to a criminal, and they were actively participating in my attempted eviction. They wanted a war. They were about to get one. Richard reached into the pocket of his pristine golf pants and pulled out his smartphone. His fingers jabbed at the screen with aggressive, self-righteous force as he dialed 911. He turned his back to me, slightly puffing out his chest as he prepared to deliver the performance of a lifetime to the local emergency dispatcher. "Yes. Hello? I need officers at my property immediately." Richard barked into the receiver, his voice trembling with manufactured distress. "We just purchased a home in Malibu, and there is a hostile squatter refusing to leave. She is becoming highly aggressive and we feel threatened. Yes, we have all the legal paperwork proving our ownership. Please hurry." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket, turning to face me with a look of absolute triumph. "You brought this on yourself, Gemma. You could have walked away with a shred of dignity, but now you are going to be dragged out of here in handcuffs." Barbara stepped up beside him, adjusting her oversized sun hat and smoothing the fabric of her floral dress. She looked at me not as a mother looks at a daughter, but as a wealthy socialite looks at a nuisance on the sidewalk. "It really is a shame you turned out this way," she sighed, her tone dripping with fake pity. "Preston warned us you might have a mental break after losing your corporate job. A single, unemployed woman in her 30s. It is just sad. We tried to give you grace, but you leave us no choice." Preston leaned against the marble kitchen island, crossing his arms and flashing a picture-perfect smile. "You should go pack a bag before the cops get here. Sis, it will save you the embarrassment of being paraded out in your pajamas." I did not move a single muscle. I stood beside my golden retriever, Bailey, resting my hand gently on his head to keep him calm. The contrast between my family's manic theatrical energy and my icy analytical silence seemed to unnerve Preston just a fraction, but he quickly masked it with another arrogant smirk. 10 agonizing minutes passed before the sound of heavy tires crunching on the gravel driveway signaled the arrival of law enforcement. 2 Malibu sheriff deputies stepped up to the open glass doors. The older deputy, a man with graying temples and a stern expression, took the lead while his younger partner stood back assessing the tension in the room. "Officer, thank goodness you are here," Richard exclaimed, rushing forward with both hands raised in a gesture of helplessness. "I am Richard, the legal owner of this estate. My wife and I just drove down here after closing a massive cash deal on this property, and this woman is refusing to vacate." The older deputy held up a hand to pause my father's frantic speech. "Let us take this one step at a time. Sir, who exactly is this woman?" Barbara let out a dramatic, trembling sigh, pressing a hand to her chest. "She is our daughter, officer. It breaks my heart to say this, but she is deeply unwell. She recently failed out of her high-paying career in Chicago and has been squatting here pretending she lives this luxurious lifestyle. She is incredibly jealous of her younger brother who actually brokered the purchase of this home for us. Preston seized his cue perfectly. He stepped forward, radiating the calm, trustworthy energy of a successful young professional. He handed the leather portfolio directly to the older deputy. "Here's the deed. Officer, $1. $5 million paid in full and signed over by the managing member of the holding company. We have the wire transfer receipts right behind it. We gave her plenty of notice to pack her things, but she is completely delusional." The deputy opened this portfolio and scanned the fake California grant deed. He was a patrol officer, not a forensic accountant or a fraud investigator. To him, standing in a kitchen on a Sunday morning, the gold foil seal, the bold typography, and the official-looking signatures appeared legitimate enough to support my family's story. The deputy turned his stern gaze toward me. "Ma'am, is this true? Are you refusing to leave a property that has been legally sold?" I met the deputy's eyes with complete composure. "That document is a fraudulent forgery." "Officer, I am the sole legal occupant of this house, and I have never authorized any sale to these people. My brother is running a financial scam on my parents, and that piece of paper was likely printed off the internet yesterday." Richard exploded, stepping aggressively toward me before the younger deputy intervened. "Listen to her lies. She is a bitter, failed spinster trying to steal our retirement home. Throw her out." The older deputy sighed heavily, closing the leather portfolio and handing it back to Preston. He looked incredibly tired, clearly recognizing the messy, toxic reality of a family civil dispute. "Look, folks, I am not a judge, and I am not a real estate lawyer. I cannot verify corporate holding company structures or wire transfers right here on the kitchen counter. As far as the police department is concerned, this is a civil matter that needs to be sorted out in a courtroom." Barbara gasped in outrage. "A civil matter. We paid $1.5 million. We have the deed." "Ma'am, please," the deputy warned, raising his voice slightly to regain control of the room. "Tensions are extremely high right now, and my primary job is to ensure nobody gets hurt." The deputy turned back to me, his expression softening just a fraction, though his professional boundary remained firm. "Ma'am, given the fact that they hold physical paperwork claiming ownership, and you are currently outnumbered in a highly volatile domestic situation, I am going to ask you to vacate the premises for the night. We need to de-escalate this immediately before someone does something they regret. You can take this to civil court on Monday morning and let a judge look at the paperwork. But for tonight, to keep the peace, you need to leave." A heavy, victorious silence fell over the kitchen. Barbara clapped her hands together in sheer delight, a vicious, triumphant smile spreading across her face. Richard puffed his chest out, looking at me like an insect he had just successfully crushed under his expensive golf shoes. Preston simply stood by the island, practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. They had won. They had successfully weaponized the police to kick me out of my own home, and they believed their $1.5 million heist was perfectly secure. I looked at the deputies, then at my gloating family. My brilliant analytical mind raced through the variables. If I fought the police right now, if I stubbornly refused a direct de-escalation order, I would be arrested for disturbing the peace. A highly publicized arrest record would jeopardize my professional auditing licenses and severely complicate the federal trap I was currently building. I needed my freedom. I needed my encrypted hard drives. And more importantly, I needed to leave them alone in this house so they could confidently dig their own graves. I gave the deputy a slow, compliant nod. "Fine," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I will pack an overnight bag and leave to keep the peace." Preston chuckled a low, nasty sound that scraped against the pristine marble counters. "Make sure you take the mutt with you." He sneered. We are replacing these floors anyway. But I do not want dog hair on my new furniture. I did not grant him the satisfaction of a response. I simply turned on my heel and walked up the floating glass staircase to the master suite. My family erupted into quiet celebratory whispers downstairs, completely blind to the fact that their petty surface-level victory was exactly what I needed. By forcing me out the front door, they had just locked themselves inside a heavily surveilled, heavily documented federal crime scene. Once inside the master suite, the heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing off the muffled sounds of my family gloating downstairs. I stood in the center of the spacious room, taking a deep breath. There were no tears. There was no panic. My heart rate had already returned to a steady, calm rhythm. In the corporate auditing world, panic is the enemy of strategy. I walked over to my walk-in closet and pulled down my sleek black suitcase. I did not waste time packing an entire wardrobe. My priority was not clothing. It was ammunition. I knelt beside the hidden floor safe tucked beneath the custom shelving. After punching in the biometric code, I pulled out 2 military-grade encrypted hard drives. These small metal rectangles held the absolute totality of Ocean Crest Holdings. They contained every bank statement, every verified tax record, the original certified property deed, and the complete financial history of my corporate career. More importantly, they held the master access keys to the smart home security system I had installed a month ago. When you buy a multi-million-dollar property as a single woman, you do not skimp on security. I had hired a private tech firm to hardwire covert high-definition cameras into the architectural features of the house. There were flush-mounted lenses in the kitchen pendant lights, micro cameras seamlessly integrated into the living room crown molding, and audio receivers hidden in the patio decking. It was a closed-loop system that recorded directly to a secure cloud server, which I exclusively controlled. I slipped the hard drives into the padded compartment of my suitcase. Then I packed a few tailored suits, a cashmere sweater, and my high-end cosmetics. If I was going to orchestrate a federal takedown, I was going to do it looking absolutely flawless. Bailey whined softly, nudging my hand with his wet nose. I smiled, dropping to one knee to scratch behind his ears. We are going on a little vacation, buddy, I whispered. Just for a little while. I grabbed my laptop bag, zipped up the suitcase, and snapped a matching leather leash onto Bailey's collar. I took one last look around the master suite. The bed was perfectly made. The ocean breeze was fluttering through the sheer curtains, and the room looked serene. By tonight, Barbara and Richard would undoubtedly claim this space, spreading their cheap luggage across my custom duvet. Let them. They were simply stepping onto a perfectly baited trap. I descended the glass staircase with measured, confident steps. The scene in the living room was predictably pathetic. Richard was already pouring himself a glass of my expensive bourbon from the wet bar, while Barbara was measuring the windows with her hands, loudly complaining about my choice of drapery. Preston was slouched on my Italian leather sofa, his muddy designer sneakers resting casually on the pristine upholstery. The 2 sheriff deputies stood near the front door, looking relieved that I was complying without a physical altercation. Leaving so soon, Preston mocked, not bothering to lift his head from the couch cushions. Make sure you leave the garage clicker on the counter, and do not steal any of the silverware on your way out. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, adjusting my grip on my suitcase. I did not glare. I did not raise my voice. I simply offered him a smile so devoid of warmth. It could have frozen the ocean outside. Keep the clicker, Preston, I said smoothly. I am sure you will find it very useful for the next few days. I turned to my parents, who were watching me with a mixture of disdain and triumph. Enjoy the house. Mom, Dad, I highly recommend watching the sunset from the patio. It really is a $1 million view. Without waiting for their response, I walked past the deputies, offering them a polite nod of gratitude for their time. I stepped out into the bright Malibu sunlight, loaded my suitcase into the trunk of my car, and opened the back door for Bailey. He jumped in happily, unaware of the treacherous family warfare unfolding around us. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away from my own property without looking in the rearview mirror. The drive down the Pacific Coast Highway was spectacular, with the top down and the ocean breeze rushing through the cabin. I felt an exhilarating surge of power. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought stripping me of my home would break my spirit. They completely, fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. You cannot outsmart a woman whose entire career was built on dismantling complex financial syndicates. 10 minutes later, I pulled into the valet circle of a 5-star luxury cliffside resort. I handed my keys to the attendant, tipped him generously, and walked into the grand lobby. My severance package alone was enough to buy out the entire hotel for a year, so I did not hesitate at the reception desk. I booked their premier oceanfront penthouse suite for an indefinite stay, requesting a corner room with the best possible Wi-Fi connection. The penthouse was breathtaking. It featured sweeping panoramic views of the Pacific, a private wraparound balcony, and a massive mahogany dining table that would serve perfectly as my command center. A bellhop delivered my luggage, and room service promptly arrived with a bottle of sparkling water and a silver bowl of fresh fruit. Once the heavy wooden door clicked shut, leaving me completely alone in the silent luxury of the suite, I went to work. I unpacked my laptops, lined them up precisely on the mahogany table, and plugged in my encrypted hard drives. My fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced, lethal speed. I bypassed the dual authentication protocols and brought the remote surveillance network online. The screens flared to life. 4 different high-definition angles of my beach house populated my monitors. The audio fed through my noise-canceling headphones with crystal clarity. On screen 1, I watched Richard carrying boxes into my kitchen. On screen 2, Barbara was physically ripping my expensive sheer curtains off the master bedroom windows. And on screen 3, the most important feed of all, Preston was standing alone on the patio, pulling his smartphone from his pocket with a frantic, nervous energy. I leaned back in my plush leather desk chair, steepling my fingers together as I watched the monitors. My family was celebrating a hollow victory inside a glass cage, completely oblivious to the fact that I was watching their every move, recording every word, and tracking every lie. The eviction was not a defeat. It was a calculated, strategic retreat. Now the real game was about to begin. The glow from my 4 monitors illuminated the darkened hotel suite. I adjusted my noise-canceling headphones, isolating the audio feed from the living room of my Malibu property. The high-definition cameras I had seamlessly integrated into the crown molding provided a crystal-clear view of the chaos unfolding inside my home. The moving crew had finally begun hauling heavy cardboard boxes and cheap, oversized furniture through my custom mahogany front doors. I watched with clinical detachment as a massive, gaudy floral sofa was shoved into the center of my minimalist living room, completely clashing with the sleek aesthetic I had carefully curated. My fingers flew across my laptop keyboard, initiating a screen recording protocol. In the corporate auditing world, evidence is the only currency that matters. I was not just watching my family invade my space. I was archiving a meticulously time-stamped digital record of trespassing, unauthorized entry, and impending property damage. Every movement they made was being logged directly to a secure, encrypted cloud server that they could never access. The audio feed crackled to life, picking up the sharp, grating sound of my mother's voice. Barbara strutted through the open-concept kitchen, running a critical finger along the edge of my imported Italian marble countertops. She wrinkled her nose, looking around the pristine space with profound disappointment. "It is just so sterile," Barbara complained loudly, her voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. Honestly, you would think a woman making her kind of money would have better taste. It looks like a dentist's waiting room. There is absolutely no warmth. Richard trailed behind her, carrying a cardboard box labeled with his golf trophies. He dumped the box unceremoniously onto my custom glass dining table, wincing as the heavy cardboard scratched the delicate surface. "What do you expect from Gemma?" Richard grumbled. "She has always been cold. No husband, no children, just spreadsheets and numbers. Thank God Preston stepped in and secured this property for us. We can finally strip all this modern nonsense out and make it feel like a real family home. A home with actual heart and soul." I sat in my plush hotel chair, sipping my sparkling water. Their insults, which would have gutted me a decade ago, now simply amused me. They were standing in a $1.5 million architectural masterpiece, completely blind to its value, tearing down my character to justify their blatant theft. They needed me to be the villain so they could play the victorious heroes of their own twisted narrative. But the real entertainment began when Preston strolled into the frame. He had abandoned his frantic pacing on the patio and joined our parents in the main living area. He pointed toward the magnificent structural partition that separated the kitchen from the formal dining room. It was an intricately designed wall clad in reclaimed cedar specifically engineered to support the massive weight of the second-story master suite. "This has got to go," Preston announced, slapping his hand against the beautiful wood finish. "It completely ruins the flow of the room. We need a massive open concept floor plan if we are going to host investors and throw huge parties. We cannot have this ugly barrier blocking the ocean view from the kitchen." Richard nodded enthusiastically, completely captivated by his son's brilliant vision. "You are absolutely right. Preston, we should knock it down right now. Why wait for expensive contractors? I have my heavy tools in the back of the SUV. Let us open this space up before the sun goes down. It will be our first real renovation as the new owners." I leaned forward, my eyes widening slightly as I stared at the monitor. My hands hovered over the keyboard. They were not seriously going to do this. That cedar wall was not a cosmetic partition. It was a primary load-bearing wall. Removing it without structural steel beams and a licensed contractor would severely compromise the integrity of the entire second floor. It was a catastrophic architectural violation, not to mention wildly illegal without municipal building permits. Within 10 minutes, Richard and Preston marched back into the living room wielding heavy steel sledgehammers they had retrieved from their luxury SUV. Barbara stood safely off to the side, clapping her hands in delighted anticipation. "This is going to be so refreshing," she cheered, completely ignorant of the disaster about to unfold. Preston swung the first blow. The heavy steel head of the sledgehammer smashed into the custom cedar paneling. The sickening crack of splintering wood echoed through my headphones. A massive hole appeared in the beautiful woodwork, exposing the reinforced drywall and structural framing beneath. Richard laughed, stepping up to take the next swing. He swung with all his might, tearing a jagged, ugly chunk out of the wall. Plaster dust billowed into the air, settling like a thick white fog over my imported countertops, my glass dining table, and their gaudy floral sofa. I did not panic. I simply hit the capture button on my keyboard, saving a high-resolution screenshot of my father and brother actively destroying my property. Every swing of their sledgehammers was adding tens of thousands of dollars in malicious property damage to the mounting federal case against them. They believed they were remodeling their new beach house. In reality, they were creating undeniable high-definition video evidence of severe structural vandalism on a property they did not legally own. I watched as the ceiling above them gave a subtle, ominous groan, a distinct structural protest against the removal of its primary support. The sheer arrogance of their ignorance was staggering. They were systematically dismantling a house they had stolen, oblivious to the fact that they were physically and legally bringing the roof down on their own heads. I adjusted my headphones, leaned back in my chair, and let the cameras keep rolling, while my family continued their destructive renovation downstairs. I muted the audio feed of their sledgehammers. It was time to shift my focus from physical vandalism to financial devastation. The structural damage to my beach house was severe, but it was nothing compared to the financial crime Preston had just committed. I minimized the camera windows on my secondary monitors and pulled my primary laptop forward. I launched my proprietary auditing software, a highly restricted program I had retained access to as part of my elite professional network. This software was designed to untangle the most sophisticated corporate fraud schemes on the planet. Preston's amateur hour scam was not going to stand a chance. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, recalling the exact 9-digit routing number and the corresponding account details I had memorized from the wire transfer receipt in my kitchen. A good auditor never forgets a string of numbers. I typed the digits into the global tracking database and hit enter. The screen turned black for a moment as the system queried international financial registries searching for the digital footprints of $1.5 million. The results populated my screen in a cascade of green text. I leaned closer, my eyes darting across the digital ledger. Richard and Barbara had authorized the wire transfer from their primary joint savings account at a local credit union. The funds were flagged as a real estate escrow deposit, but the destination was not a licensed California title company. The money had landed in a holding account registered to an entity called Apex Global Ventures. Apex Global Ventures. The name alone practically screamed shell company. I ran a cross-reference on the corporate registry database. As I suspected, Apex Global was incorporated exactly 3 weeks ago in Delaware, a state notorious for allowing anonymous corporate ownership. There was no physical address listed, only a registered agent operating out of a strip mall post office box. Preston had set up a corporation specifically to intercept our parents' life savings. He had probably told them Apex Global was the parent company of Ocean Crest Holdings, and they were too financially illiterate to verify his claim. But the money did not stay in Delaware. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing a deeper trace protocol. Fraudsters never leave stolen cash in a domestic account for long. The United States banking system is too heavily monitored. Preston knew he had to move the funds outside federal jurisdiction quickly. I followed the digital breadcrumbs. Less than 2 hours after my parents initiated the wire transfer, the $1.5 million was split into 4 separate transactions. This was a classic money laundering technique known as layering, designed to confuse investigators and obscure the final destination of the funds. I tracked the first chunk of money as it bounced from Delaware to a holding account in Panama. The second chunk routed through a cryptocurrency exchange based in Eastern Europe. The third and fourth chunks were funneled through a series of anonymous online casinos. Preston was trying to wash the money, but he was leaving a painfully obvious digital trail. He was arrogant, but he was not a professional money launderer. Snorts. Astastama. He was a gambling addict with a god complex who watched too many crime movies. I initiated a consolidation algorithm commanding my software to track all 4 diverging paths simultaneously and find their eventual convergence point. I watched the progress bar on my screen slowly fill. My heart hammered a steady rhythm against my ribs. I needed to see exactly where he was hiding the cash. The software chimed a sharp metallic sound cutting through the silence of my hotel suite. The results materialized on the screen. All 4 transaction paths eventually converged and dumped their washed funds into a single, highly secure offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I stared at the offshore banking institution's digital profile. The Cayman account was heavily fortified behind international banking secrecy laws. I could see the final destination of the stolen money, but the account ownership was completely shielded. The bank used alphanumeric proxy tags instead of human names, without a court order or direct login credentials. I could not legally prove that Preston was the owner of that specific Cayman account. And without that definitive link, my case for federal wire fraud was incomplete. I drummed my fingers against the mahogany table. I had the fake deed. I had the initial wire transfer showing the theft. I had the digital map proving the money laundering. But the final piece of the puzzle, the undisputed proof that Preston was the ultimate beneficiary of the offshore account, was locked behind a wall of Caribbean encryption. I needed the login credentials. I needed the device he used to authorize the offshore transfers. Or, failing that, I needed his personal financial history, his social security verification, and the secondary authentication codes tied to his private phone. I could not hack his phone remotely without risking detection. Preston might be a reckless idiot, but he was a paranoid idiot. He would have notifications set up for unauthorized access attempts. I needed someone on the inside. I needed someone who had physical access to his devices, who knew his passwords, and who had the legal right to scrutinize his marital assets. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. There was exactly one person on the planet who fit that description. Naomi. Preston had been married to Naomi for 3 years. She was a brilliant, sharp-witted woman who worked as a financial attorney in downtown Los Angeles. My family had always treated Naomi with a sickening blend of fake politeness and subtle condescending microaggressions. Barbara constantly made passive-aggressive comments about Naomi prioritizing her demanding career over having children. Richard often questioned Naomi about legal matters, but immediately dismissed her expert advice in favor of whatever nonsense Preston had read on an internet forum. Naomi was a powerhouse, and my family treated her like an inconvenient accessory to their golden child. I knew she was exhausted by Preston's constant financial failures and his massive, fragile ego. I knew she was tired of covering his tracks and maintaining the illusion of a perfect marriage for the sake of my parents. Preston thought he had orchestrated the perfect crime because he believed nobody in the family was smart enough to catch him. He completely forgot that he was legally bound to a financial attorney, and he had just actively angered a corporate auditor. I minimized my auditing software and pulled up my private contacts. I had not spoken to Naomi in months, keeping my distance to avoid the toxic blast radius of my family. But right now, we shared a common enemy. If Preston was willing to steal $1, $5 million from his own parents and launder it offshore, he was definitely hiding money from his wife. Naomi would want to know, and more importantly, Naomi would want revenge. I picked up my phone and drafted a highly secure encrypted message to her private legal email address. I did not include any incriminating details. I simply asked her to meet me for coffee at a discreet location, stressing that it involved Preston, a massive financial liability, and her own legal protection. I hit send. The trap was expanding, and I had just recruited my inside man. I did not have to wait long. Less than 15 minutes later, my cell phone vibrated on the mahogany desk. The caller ID displayed a blocked number, a standard precaution for high-tier corporate attorneys who did not want their billing hours tracked by casual acquaintances. I swiped to accept the call, bringing the phone to my ear without saying a word. In my profession, whoever speaks first loses the leverage. Gemma, a sharp, composed voice came through the speaker. It was Naomi. I am currently in the middle of negotiating a highly sensitive corporate merger. You sent a message to my encrypted firm email mentioning Preston financial liability and my personal legal protection. You have exactly 60 seconds to explain why I should not block your number and walk back into my boardroom. I smiled at the sheer efficiency of her tone. Naomi was a powerhouse. As an African-American woman who had fought her way to a senior partnership at a throat Los Angeles law firm, she did not tolerate inefficiency or drama. Over the past 3 years, I had watched my mother Barbara inflict a relentless campaign of subtle, smiling microaggressions against her. At Thanksgiving dinners, Barbara would make pointed, condescending remarks about Naomi wearing her hair in natural, protective styles instead of chemical blowouts, or casually suggest that Naomi was perhaps too aggressive and masculine for prioritizing her legal career over giving Preston children. Richard would constantly undermine her intelligence, asking her legal questions only to loudly disagree with her expert answers because of a blog post he had read. And through all of it, Preston had never defended her. He just sat there swirling his expensive scotch, completely indifferent to the toxic environment his family created for his wife. Naomi had endured it with icy, impeccable grace. Treating my parents like mildly annoying clients she was forced to placate. But I knew she despised them. More importantly, I knew she was entirely too smart to stay attached to a sinking ship like my brother for much longer. I am not calling for family small talk. Naomi, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I am calling auditor to attorney. Your husband just orchestrated a massive financial scam against my parents. He convinced them to liquidate their primary residence, took their $5 million, and routed it through a Delaware shell company straight into an anonymous offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I could practically hear the gears turning in Naomi's brilliant legal mind as she processed the gravity of my words. That is a very serious accusation. Gemma, she replied, her voice dropping an octave, completely stripping away the polite family facade. If you are angry about whatever petty drama your parents are currently involved in, leave me out of it. I do not have time for Preston's usual financial incompetence. This is not his usual incompetence, I countered smoothly. This is federal wire fraud. He printed a fake California grant deed from the internet and told them he bought my Malibu beach house. They are currently standing in my living room with sledgehammers destroying my load-bearing walls because they think they own the property. But the money is gone. Naomi. And here is why you need to care. Preston is unemployed. You are the primary breadwinner. You file your taxes jointly. When the FBI traces that Cayman Islands account, the federal government is going to look directly at your law firm salary and your personal assets to recover the stolen funds. He is using your marital financial umbrella to shield his money laundering. A sharp intake of breath echoed through the receiver. As a financial lawyer, Naomi knew exactly how devastating the legal doctrine of joint and several liability could be. If the federal government decided she was a complicit spouse, they could freeze her bank accounts, seize her investment portfolios, and completely destroy the prestigious legal career she had sacrificed everything to build. Preston was not just ruining his parents. He was dragging his highly successful wife straight into a federal indictment. Do you have proof? Naomi demanded. Her voice was no longer dismissive. It was lethal. I have the digital trace of the wire transfers I confirmed. I have the shell company incorporation documents. I have high-definition video of the property damage. What I do not have is the final link. I need the login credentials or the secondary device authentication that ties Preston to that specific offshore account. I know you have access to his home office. I know you know how to bypass his security measures. I need an inside man. Naomi. And you need to legally distance yourself from a federal criminal before the ink on the warrants dries. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of Los Angeles traffic in the background. Naomi had clearly stepped out of her corporate building to take this call on the street, ensuring she was not recorded by her firm's internal servers. I have suspected for months that he was hiding something, she said, the realization hardening her tone into pure steel. He has been erratic, taking secret phone calls at all hours, and lying about where he goes during the day. I thought he was just funneling my money into another one of his idiotic tech startups. If he is running a shell company scam using our home network, he has compromised my entire life. Then let us destroy him together, I offered. You get the evidence you need to file an ironclad fault-based divorce and protect your assets. I get the evidence I need to put him in a federal penitentiary and reclaim my property. We both win. Where are you? Naomi asked, making the decision instantly. I am staying at a hotel down the coast, I replied. But we cannot meet here. My parents might figure out where I am and we need absolute privacy. There is an exclusive coffee shop in Santa Monica, Naomi instructed, her voice reverting to full command mode. It is called The Archive. I rent a private conference room there for off-site client meetings. It has zero surveillance and requires a key card for entry. I will text you the address and the temporary access code. Be there in exactly 2 hours. Bring the hard drives. If this is real, Gemma, I am going to gut him financially before the feds even put the handcuffs on him. I will be there, I promised. The call disconnected. I placed my phone face down on the mahogany table and let out a long, satisfying breath. The dominoes were perfectly aligned. My family thought they had successfully evicted a weak, unemployed spinster. Instead, they had just forced a senior corporate auditor and a ruthless financial attorney into a lethal alliance. I packed my laptops back into my leather bag, gave Bailey a reassuring pat on the head, and headed for the door. It was time to go to work. The drive to Santa Monica took 45 minutes, giving me just enough time to mentally rehearse the presentation of my evidence. I navigated my car through the heavy coastal traffic and pulled into an underground parking garage 2 blocks away from the archive. I left Bailey resting comfortably in the climate-controlled vehicle with the security mode activated, grabbed my heavy leather bag, and walked out into the glaring midday sun. The coffee shop was incredibly discreet, nestled between a high-end art gallery and a boutique fitness studio. There was no massive illuminated sign, just a frosted glass door with a minimalist logo. I stepped inside, bypassing the main counter where baristas were pulling espresso shots for wealthy tourists, and headed straight for the private corridor in the back. I punched the temporary access code Naomi had provided into the digital keypad. The heavy door clicked open, sealing out the ambient noise of the cafe the second it closed behind me. The private conference room was a windowless, soundproof bunker designed for million-dollar corporate negotiations. Naomi was already sitting at the far end of the sleek wooden table. She wore a perfectly tailored emerald green suit, her natural hair styled in an immaculate crown of twists. She looked like a woman who could dismantle a Fortune 500 company before her morning coffee. There was no trace of the quiet, polite daughter-in-law who endured my mother's passive-aggressive remarks at holiday dinners. This was Naomi, the apex predator. She did not offer a hug or a pleasant greeting. She merely pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the empty chair across from her. "Sit down and show me everything," Naomi commanded, her dark eyes entirely devoid of warmth. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I unzipped my leather bag and pulled out my primary laptop, plugging in the encrypted hard drive. While the system booted up, I slid manila folder across the smooth surface of the table. "Open it," I said. "That is a copy of the fake California grant deed your husband used to steal my parents' life savings." Naomi opened the folder. Her eyes darted across the document, absorbing the fraudulent details with frightening speed. I watched her perfectly sculpted eyebrows twitch as she noticed the amateur formatting errors, the missing parcel digits, and the ridiculous gold foil sticker. He actually used Arial font for a municipal county header, Naomi murmured, her voice laced with absolute disgust. "He is not just a criminal, Gemma. He is an incredibly stupid criminal." I turned my laptop screen toward her. "It gets much worse," I promised. "I am the sole owner and managing member of Ocean Crest Holdings, LLC. Preston photoshopped a fake executive named David Thorne to sign over a house that I own. But the real crime is the money trail." I pulled up the digital ledger. I watched him convince Barbara and Richard to wire $1.5 million directly into a Delaware shell company called Apex Global Ventures. I explained, pointing to the highlighted transactions. From there, I tracked the funds as he layered them through Panama and an Eastern European cryptocurrency exchange. The money finally landed in an anonymous offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands. I waited for the shock. I expected her to gasp, to deny it, or perhaps to shed a tear for the catastrophic implosion of her marriage. Instead, Naomi leaned back in her leather chair, stared at the ceiling, and let out a sharp, chilling laugh. It was a cold, humorless sound that contained 0% heartbreak and 100% vindication. She laughed until she had to wipe a stray tear of pure amusement from the corner of her eye. "I thought he was just an incompetent narcissist," Naomi said, shaking her head as she looked back down at the fake deed. "But he actually crossed the line into federal wire fraud. He just handed me the silver bullet I have been looking for." She reached down, lifted her designer briefcase onto the table, and snapped the brass locks open. It is my turn to share. Gemma, you think you are the only one who has been doing forensic accounting this week? Naomi pulled out a thick stack of bank statements highlighted in red and yellow ink. 2 weeks ago, I noticed a massive discrepancy in our primary joint checking account. She explained, sliding the papers toward me. Preston claimed he was moving funds around to invest in a highly exclusive tech incubator. But I am a financial attorney. I do not take my husband's word for anything regarding my money. I quietly ran a deep audit on every single account we share. Over the past 8 months, Preston has systematically drained $400,000 of my personal earnings. He funneled it all into high-stakes offshore sports betting and underground poker syndicates. I stared at the statements tracing the massive frequent withdrawals. He lost everything, I realized. The pieces of his frantic behavior suddenly making perfect sense. He lost your money and he was completely desperate. Naomi nodded, her jaw clenching with barely contained fury. The loan sharks were clearly circling. He needed a massive influx of cash to cover his debts and replace the money he stole from me before I noticed it was gone. That is why he targeted your parents. They were the perfect gullible marks. He knew they would liquidate their house in a heartbeat if he promised them a shiny new beach estate. He never intended to buy a house. He just needed to steal their $1. $5 million to save his own skin. He is going to take them down with him. I said, feeling a surge of disgust for my parents' blindness, but an even stronger hatred for my brother's ruthless greed. Naomi reached into her briefcase one final time. She pulled out a pristine, legally binding document bound in a blue cover. She slapped it down on top of the bank statements. Let him take them down, Naomi said, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Barbara and Richard enabled this monster his entire life. They created a man who thinks he can steal from his wife and scam his parents without facing a single consequence. But he is not taking me down with him. I looked at the blue document. It was a fully drafted petition for dissolution of marriage. The paperwork was immaculate, completely filled out and ready to be filed with the Los Angeles Superior Court. I drafted these divorce papers 3 days ago, Naomi revealed, tapping the front page. I was just waiting for the right moment to serve him so I could financially ruin him in civil court. But your evidence changes everything. We are not just going to divorce him, Gemma. We are going to lock him in a federal prison cell. I met her gaze, seeing the exact same cold, calculating fire that burned in my own chest. We did not need to cry over the family we had lost. We just needed to execute the trap perfectly. I need his secondary authentication codes, I told her, pointing to my laptop screen. I can see the Cayman Islands account where he parked my parents' money, but I cannot legally tie his name to it without his direct digital fingerprint. Can you get me his backup device? Naomi offered a dark, brilliant smile. Preston is an idiot. He leaves his backup tablet unsecured in his home office safe because he assumes I do not know the combination. I will have the device in your hands by tomorrow morning. We are going to bleed him dry. I closed my laptop, the screen going dark. The alliance was officially forged. My parents had treated Naomi like a second-class citizen, and they had treated me like an expendable bank account. Now the two women they severely underestimated were holding all the cards. I will prepare the federal dossier, I said, packing my equipment back into the leather bag. Once we have the digital fingerprint linking him to the offshore account, we go straight to the authorities. Naomi stood up, smoothing the front of her emerald suit. Let him enjoy his fake beach house for a few more days, she said smoothly. I want him to feel completely untouchable right before we tear his entire life apart. Naomi turned and exited the soundproof conference room, her emerald green suit disappearing into the bustling coffee shop. I remained in the bunker for another hour, meticulously organizing the initial files on my encrypted hard drive before making my way back to the Cliffside Hotel. The rest of the evening was spent in total isolation, preparing my auditing software for the massive data influx I knew was coming. I ordered room service, fed Bailey his dinner, and watched the live feed of my beach house on the secondary monitors. My parents were currently uncorking a bottle of expensive champagne in my kitchen, toasting to their brilliant son. Preston stood beside the shattered remains of my load-bearing wall, raising his glass with a sickening grin. Their joy was entirely built on a foundation of stolen money and federal crimes. The next morning, precisely at 8 o'clock, a sharp knock echoed through my penthouse suite. I opened the heavy wooden door to find Naomi standing in the hallway. She wore a sharp charcoal pantsuit and held a sleek silver briefcase. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, taking in the panoramic ocean view and the array of glowing monitors spread across my mahogany dining table. "I have the device," Naomi announced, placing her briefcase on the table and snapping the brass locks open. He came home late last night, completely intoxicated after celebrating his supposed real estate victory with some of his poker buddies. He passed out in the guest bedroom. It took me less than 2 minutes to open his office safe. He actually uses our wedding anniversary as his passcode. The sheer lack of imagination is almost offensive. Naomi retrieved a slim silver tablet and a black USB flash drive, setting them down next to my primary laptop. I pulled up my tracking software, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Let us see exactly how careless he was. I said, connecting the tablet to my secure network. As a financial attorney, Naomi understood digital security better than most. She knew Preston used an autofill password manager for his offshore betting accounts. A catastrophic for anyone trying to hide illicit funds. I ran a mirroring program bypassing the superficial lock screen on the tablet and accessing the core storage drive. Within minutes, the password vault cracked open. A massive list of encrypted credentials flooded my monitor. There, Naomi pointed her manicured nail, tapping the glass of the screen. "Look at the financial sector tags." He labeled the Cayman Islands account under a generic consulting alias. I extracted the specific alphanumeric proxy tag and the corresponding decryption key. I transferred the data into my global tracking database, marrying the offshore routing number we found yesterday with the direct login credentials Naomi had just provided. I hit enter, executing the final sequence. The wall of Caribbean banking encryption shattered instantly. The screen refreshed, pulling up the live, unrestricted dashboard of the offshore holding account. The account owner was clearly listed as Preston with his personal social security number and Los Angeles address registered in the hidden metadata. Below his name, the current balance glowed in bright green digits, $1,482,000. He had already blown $18,000 since yesterday, likely paying off the aggressive loan sharks Naomi had mentioned. "We have him," I stated, feeling a cold rush of absolute triumph. "The digital fingerprint is confirmed. We have successfully linked the stolen $1.5 million from Richard and Barbara directly to an offshore account solely controlled by Preston. The chain of evidence is completely unbroken." Naomi pulled a thick stack of legal parchment from her briefcase, her eyes flashing with predatory intensity. "Then we start building the federal indictment right now. You handle the forensic accounting trace, and I will draft the legal framework. We are going to hand the FBI prosecuted case on a silver platter. For the next 6 hours, my hotel suite transformed into a relentless, high-powered war room. The synergy between a corporate auditor and a financial mergers attorney was devastating. We did not just compile documents. We constructed a masterpiece of criminal prosecution. I printed the initial wire transfer receipt, the Delaware Shell Company Incorporation forms for Apex Global Ventures, and the detailed digital map showing the money laundering layers through Panama and the cryptocurrency exchanges. I added the high-resolution screenshots of Preston holding the fake California grant deed in my kitchen, alongside the property tax records proving I was the sole owner of Ocean Crest Holdings, LLC. Naomi took my financial evidence and began writing the legal memorandums. Her legal phrasing was brutal and precise. She cited specific violations of the United States Code, officially detailing the elements of Title 18, Section 1343 for federal wire fraud. She cross-referenced the forged real estate documents, establishing clear intent to defraud vulnerable senior citizens across state lines. She added her own bank statements to the pile, proving the history of his gambling addiction and the sudden suspicious depletion of their joint marital assets. We worked with a synchronized mechanical efficiency. We did not stop to eat. We barely stopped to drink our coffee. Every piece of paper we generated was another year added to his eventual prison sentence, when we needed to verify the structural damage he was causing to my home. I simply pulled up the live security feed. We took additional screenshots of the demolished cedar wall, adding a civil liability section for malicious destruction of private property. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the mahogany table was covered in pristine, organized stacks of paper. We compiled everything into 3 identical heavy-duty black binders. The first binder was for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The second binder was for Naomi's divorce proceedings. The third binder was my personal insurance policy. Naomi closed the final binder, smoothing her hand over the black leather cover. She looked across the table at me, her expression a mixture of profound exhaustion and absolute victory. It is airtight. Gemma, any federal prosecutor in the country would take this case in a heartbeat. It is an open and shut conviction. He will not even have the opportunity to negotiate a plea deal. The evidence is simply too overwhelming. I rested my hands on the stack of documents, feeling the physical weight of my brother's impending downfall. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. He thought he could manipulate our parents, steal their future, and bully me out of my own home without facing a single consequence. He never anticipated that the 2 women his family constantly disrespected would be the architects of his total destruction. "We have the weapon," I said, looking out at the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. "Now we just need the perfect stage to deploy it." Naomi checked her phone, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "Well, it looks like your parents are about to provide the perfect stage for us. They just sent out a mass group text to the entire extended family and all of their wealthy country club friends." She turned the phone screen toward me so I could read it myself. It was an extravagant digital invitation featuring a photo of my beach house. The bold text read, "Join us this Saturday for a spectacular housewarming party at our new $1 million Malibu estate." They were throwing a massive, highly public celebration inside a stolen house. It was the absolute pinnacle of their toxic arrogance. And it was exactly the opportunity we needed. We had the ironclad dossier. Now we had the audience. Naomi forwarded the digital invitation directly to my secure email, ensuring we had a high-resolution copy of their spectacular arrogance saved for the federal prosecutor. We spent the remainder of the afternoon synchronizing our timelines. She would return to her law firm to finalize the divorce filings, pretending everything was perfectly normal with her husband. I would remain in the penthouse monitoring the digital feeds and tracking any sudden movements in Preston's offshore accounts. We agreed to rendezvous precisely 1 hour before the housewarming party commenced. The following week dragged on with excruciating slowness. Yet every passing day provided a wealth of damning surveillance footage. I practically lived in front of my 4 monitors. From my luxurious hotel suite, I watched my parents transform my tranquil beach sanctuary into a gaudy display of nouveau riche desperation. They hired an expensive local landscaping crew to rip out my native coastal plants, replacing them with imported water-heavy tropical palms that completely violated local zoning ordinances. They brought in a parade of overpriced interior decorators who covered my sleek minimalist furniture with hideous, oversized throw pillows and metallic accent pieces that blinded the security cameras when the afternoon sun hit them. But the most infuriating moments came from the constant stream of digital communications buzzing on my phone. Barbara and Richard had not just created a digital flyer. They had initiated a massive, unescapable group text that included over 60 people. The participant list was a who's who of their suburban country club elite, extended family members who had always treated me with polite indifference, and various business associates my father wanted to impress. My phone vibrated on the mahogany desk. I picked it up and opened the sprawling group chat. Barbara was in her element, firing off messages with a frantic, boastful energy. "We are just so incredibly blessed. Barbara texted the massive group. Richard and I always knew our sacrifices would pay off. Our brilliant son, Preston, orchestrated the most magnificent real estate deal, securing this multi-million-dollar Malibu estate entirely in cash. He is an absolute financial prodigy. We cannot wait to host you all this Saturday for champagne and caviar by the ocean. The responses flooded in immediately. Aunts, uncles, and wealthy suburbanites sent a barrage of congratulations praising Preston's supposed business acumen and fawning over my parents' upgraded lifestyle. My father chimed in shortly after inflating the purchase price to $2. $5 million just to feed his own massive ego. Then came the message that solidified my absolute lack of mercy. Barbara sent a direct follow-up message to the entire group explicitly tagging my phone number so the notification would flash aggressively on my screen. It is truly a shame Gemma cannot join us for the celebration. Barbara wrote her passive-aggressive venom completely undisguised. She recently abandoned her career and is currently experiencing some housing insecurity. She had to vacate this very property because she simply could not afford the lifestyle. We are praying she finds a small, affordable apartment soon. But this Saturday is all about positive energy and celebrating Preston's massive success. I stared at the glowing screen. She had essentially announced to our entire extended family and social circle that I was a homeless, unemployed failure who had been rightfully evicted by my superior brother. She was using my supposed destitution as a dark, pathetic contrast to highlight Preston's glowing achievement. She wanted everyone to arrive at my stolen house, drink champagne on my patio, and pity the tragic spinster daughter who could not compete with the golden child. I did not reply. A seasoned auditor never alerts the target that an investigation is underway. I simply took a screenshot of the group text and dropped it into the evidence folder. It proved malicious intent and established a public timeline of their fraud. On Thursday afternoon, 2 days before the massive event, I watched the live security feed as a high-end catering company arrived at the beach house. 5 workers in crisp white uniforms began unloading crates of expensive crystal glassware, premium liquor, and massive floral arrangements. Preston strutted around the kitchen barking orders at the catering manager while swigging from a bottle of imported beer. He was putting on a pathetic show of extreme wealth. My audio receivers picked up his conversation with a couple of his sycophantic friends who had dropped by early to admire the property. Yeah, the market is tough right now for amateurs. Preston boasted loudly, leaning against the marble island he had tried to evict me from. But when you have the right offshore connections and serious liquid capital, you can bypass the traditional banking bottlenecks. I basically handed my parents this estate. I am using the rest of the investment capital to launch my new tech incubator. The returns are going to be astronomical. His friends nodded enthusiastically, completely blinded by the ocean view and the free alcohol. Preston was literally confessing to money laundering and the unauthorized diversion of investment capital on camera while standing in a house he had zero legal right to occupy. The sheer density of his stupidity was almost breathtaking. My phone buzzed again. It was a secure message from Naomi. She had just finished a brutal day at her corporate firm and was checking in on our target. He just charged another $12,000 to a joint credit card I purposely left unlocked. Naomi wrote, "He is funding the entire catering bill and the premium alcohol for the party using my credit line. He thinks I am too busy with the merger to review the daily statements. I am adding the fraudulent credit charges to the divorce settlement as we speak. How is the visual surveillance holding up?" I typed my response with a cold, predatory smile. "The surveillance is perfect," I replied. "They are spending money they do not have to impress people who do not care inside a property they do not own. The catering setup is extensive. They are planning for a massive, highly public spectacle." "Good," Naomi responded immediately. "A public spectacle requires a public execution. I will see you on Saturday." I locked my phone and returned my gaze to the monitors. Barbara was now arguing with the head caterer about the placement of an ice sculpture, demanding it be centered perfectly in front of the shattered exposed drywall of the load-bearing partition they had destroyed. She wanted the venue to look absolutely flawless for her country club friends. She had no idea that her pristine, glamorous housewarming party was about to become the most heavily attended federal crime scene in Malibu history. They wanted to humiliate me in front of 60 people. They wanted an audience to validate their toxic family hierarchy. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. The stage was beautifully set. The actors were blindly rehearsing their lines, and the curtain was about to rise on their total inescapable destruction. Friday night arrived with a thick coastal fog rolling over the Pacific, blanketing the shoreline in a heavy, ominous gray. Inside my penthouse suite, the atmosphere was crackling with electric anticipation. Naomi had just walked through my double doors, having left her corporate law firm under the guise of an emergency weekend work retreat. She dropped her sleek silver briefcase onto the mahogany dining table and immediately took her place beside me at the command center. We had exactly 14 hours before the housewarming party commenced. The digital surveillance feeds were running smoothly across the 4 monitors. Inside the beach house, the caterers had departed for the evening, leaving behind towering floral arrangements and stacked crates of premium champagne. Barbara and Richard had retired to the master bedroom early, claiming they needed their beauty rest for their grand society debut tomorrow. The main living areas were dark and silent, but screen 3, the camera angled over the expansive cedar patio, was active. Preston was pacing relentlessly back and forth across the deck. The glowing ember of an expensive cigar illuminated his face in the darkness. He held his smartphone pressed tightly against his ear, his free hands slicing through the foggy air with agitated, jerky movements. I reached out and maximized the patio feed, turning the audio receiver dial all the way up. The microphone I had concealed beneath the decking boards was highly sensitive. It picked up the rhythmic sound of the crashing waves, the rustle of the new tropical palms, and then, with absolute pristine clarity, the sound of my brother's voice. "I told you to back off." Preston hissed into the phone, his arrogant facade slipping into something much more desperate and aggressive. "I already wired you $18,000 yesterday. That was a show of good faith. You will get the remaining $250,000 by Tuesday morning when the international banking holds clear." Naomi leaned forward, her dark eyes locking onto the screen. She pulled a fresh legal pad from her briefcase and poised her pen over the paper. "That is his bookie," she whispered coldly. "Or worse, the loan shark who has been financing his underground poker buy-ins. Turn the gain up." "Gemma, we need every single syllable." I adjusted the frequency equalizer, filtering out the background ocean noise until Preston's voice cut through the speakers like a knife. The voice on the other end of the line was muffled, but Preston's response provided all the context we could ever need. He let out a sharp, cruel laugh, taking a long drag from his cigar before exhaling a cloud of smoke into the salty air. "Do you really think I am playing games?" Preston boasted, his massive ego overriding his survival instincts. "I am sitting on over $1 million in liquid cash. It was pathetically easy. My stupid boomer parents practically begged me to take it. They liquidated their entire suburban estate, drained their retirement portfolios, and wired $1.5 million straight into my Delaware holding account. They actually thought I brokered a private cash deal for this Malibu property." Naomi's pen flew across her legal pad, documenting the exact timestamps of the recording. "I printed a fake property deed off some cheap legal blog, slapped a gold sticker on it, and handed it to my father." Preston continued pacing toward the edge of the glass railing. The old fool almost cried, thanking me. "They are inside right now, sleeping in the master bedroom, completely oblivious. They think they own a luxury beach house. They have no idea the money is sitting safely in my Cayman Islands account." The person on the phone muttered something else. Preston scoffed, kicking a stray pebble off the deck. "No, the sister is not a problem." Preston sneered, and my own name suddenly became the topic of his confession. "She was squatting here, but we kicked her out yesterday. She is a weak, unemployed spinster who folded the second the cops showed up. She packed her little bags and ran away with her tail between her legs. She is too stupid to check the county records, and she has zero money to fight me in court. I am completely untouchable. He paused, his voice dropping into a hardened, threatening tone. So, call off your guys. I am throwing a massive party tomorrow to keep my parents distracted and happy. On Monday, I transfer the remaining funds to a crypto wallet. And by Tuesday, your debt is paid in full. Do not call this number again. Preston ended the call, shoving the phone back into his pocket. He took one last arrogant drag of his cigar, flicked the butt over the glass railing onto the pristine beach below, and strutted back inside the house, sliding the glass door shut behind him. The patio feed went silent. In the hotel suite, the silence was equally absolute. Naomi and I sat frozen for a moment, simply absorbing the sheer magnitude of what we had just captured. We did not just have a paper trail anymore. We had a pristine, high-definition audio recording of the primary suspect detailing his entire criminal enterprise, confirming his intent to defraud, and explicitly naming his victims. Naomi slowly set her pen down on the mahogany table. She looked at me, a slow, terrifying smile spreading across her beautiful features. "Gemma," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He just handed us the holy grail of federal prosecution. I hit the command key, extracting the audio file from the cloud server, and locking it onto our 2 encrypted hard drives. I felt a surge of adrenaline so powerful it made my fingertips tingle. In a single 2-minute phone call, Preston had confessed to elder financial abuse, federal wire fraud, interstate money laundering, and the malicious forgery of legal real estate documents. He had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he acted with deliberate predatory intent against our parents. He had confirmed that the $1, $5 million was stolen, acknowledging the Cayman Islands account, and his plan to further obscure the funds through cryptocurrency. That recording is the difference between a civil lawsuit and a mandatory federal prison sentence, I stated, ejecting the flash drives and placing them carefully into the final binder. He thinks he is untouchable because he thinks he is the smartest person in the room. He has no idea he just gave a signed confession to a financial attorney and a corporate auditor. Naomi snapped her silver briefcase shut, locking the duplicate evidence files securely inside. We have the financial trace. We have the fraudulent deed. We have the proof of property destruction. And now we have the audio confession. The dossier is flawless. I looked at the digital clock on my laptop screen. It was almost midnight. The housewarming party was scheduled to begin at exactly 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. My parents were asleep in my house, dreaming of their high society debut. Preston was asleep in my guest room, dreaming of his offshore wealth. "It is time to make the call," I said, reaching for my cell phone. Naomi nodded, her eyes flashing with anticipation. "Make the call, Gemma. Let us burn his empire to the ground." I picked up my smartphone and dialed a secure number I had acquired during my years investigating corporate embezzlement in Chicago. Agent Harrison was a senior investigator in the Federal Bureau of Investigation White-Collar Crime Division based out of Los Angeles. We had collaborated on a massive pharmaceutical audit 3 years ago. He respected my meticulous forensic accounting, and I respected his absolute lack of mercy for financial predators. Harrison answered on the second ring. I told him I had a fully packaged wire fraud, an international money laundering case complete with a crystal-clear audio confession and offshore routing data. He told me to be at the Federal Building at 7 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. The sun was just rising over downtown Los Angeles when Naomi and I walked through the heavy glass doors of the Federal Building. We were escorted to a sterile, windowless briefing room on the 5th floor. Agent Harrison walked in carrying a cup of black coffee. He looked tired but exceptionally sharp. I slid the primary black binder across the metal table. Naomi placed a digital tablet next to it, preloaded with the audio file. We sat back and let Harrison do his job. He opened the binder. For 20 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the room was the turning of crisp paper and his occasional sharp intake of breath. He reviewed the fake California grant deed, the Delaware Shell Company Incorporation, and my intricate map of the cryptocurrency layering. Then Naomi tapped the screen of the tablet, playing Preston's arrogant patio confession. Harrison listened to my brother brag about duping our parents and washing the stolen cash. When the recording finally ended, Harrison slowly closed the binder. He looked at us with a mixture of professional awe and deadly serious intent. "YouTube basically did my entire department's job in 48 hours, Harrison said, pulling his cell phone from his jacket. "This is not just wire fraud. This is elder financial abuse, forgery, and international money laundering. I am waking up a federal magistrate judge right now." Naomi leaned forward, her charcoal suit perfectly crisp under the harsh fluorescent lights. "We need the arrest to happen today, Agent Harrison," she stated with absolute legal authority. "The target is hosting a massive gathering at 100 this afternoon at the Malibu property he fraudulently claimed to purchase. He intends to move the funds to an untraceable crypto wallet by Monday. If you raid the housewarming party today, you catch him entirely off guard, seize his electronic devices before he can wipe them, and legally secure the remaining stolen funds." Harrison did not need convincing. A highly public arrest with a maximum element of surprise was a tactical dream for federal agents. He left the room for an hour. When he returned, he held a stack of freshly printed documents. They were federal search and arrest warrants. A magistrate judge had reviewed our ironclad dossier and signed off on all of them immediately. The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands were officially frozen pending federal seizure. The dominoes were meticulously set up, and the trap was permanently locked. I stood up and shook Harrison's hand. The legal machinery was now in motion. My family had spent the entire morning preparing for the social event of the season, completely unaware that federal agents were currently reviewing the floor plans to my beach house. By noon, the Malibu property had been completely transformed into a spectacle of unearned extravagance. Naomi and I sat in my hotel suite watching the high-definition security feeds as the invasion of high society guests began. A fleet of luxury vehicles lined the private driveway, and a valet service my parents had inexplicably hired was frantically trying to manage the overflow of sports cars and luxury sedans. Inside my home, the scene was nauseating. The caterers had erected a massive cascading champagne fountain right in the center of the kitchen, strategically positioned to draw attention away from the exposed, jagged drywall where Preston had demolished my load-bearing wall. Over 50 guests milled about the open floor plan and spilled out onto the cedar patio. They were draped in designer resort wear, clinking crystal glasses, and marveling at the breathtaking ocean views. Barbara was in her absolute element. She floated through the crowd in a flowing white linen dress, holding a flute of expensive champagne and graciously accepting compliments that she had absolutely no right to claim. The audio receivers picked up every word of her self-indulgent performance. "Oh, thank you so much!" Barbara gushed to a group of wealthy country club acquaintances. "Richard and I just fell in love with the architecture. We simply had to have it. Of course, we never could have navigated the cash acquisition without our brilliant son. Preston has such an incredible mind for real estate investment." Richard was holding court near the wet bar, slapping the backs of his former business associates and laughing loudly. He proudly pointed out the modifications they planned to make, bragging about tearing down walls and ripping up imported floors as if the destruction of property was a badge of honor. Naturally, it did not take long for my name to be dragged through the mud. A curious aunt asked Barbara where I was noting my suspicious absence from such a major family milestone. I watched my mother wave her hand dismissively, her face twisting into a mask of theatrical pity. "Gemma is going through a very difficult, very messy transition right now." Barbara sighed loudly, ensuring everyone in her immediate circle could hear. She completely fell apart under the pressure of her corporate job and had to resign. She was actually renting a small room nearby, but she could not manage the expenses and had to vacate. We offered to let her stay in our guest house, but she was just too bitter and jealous of Preston's massive success to accept our charity. It is a tragedy, really, but some people simply cannot handle seeing their younger siblings thrive. The guests murmured in sympathetic agreement, praising Barbara for her saintly patience with such a difficult, ungrateful daughter. Preston strutted past the group, soaking up the admiring glances, and playing the part of the humble, self-made millionaire perfectly. He mingled with the crowd, clinking glasses, and accepting praise for a financial victory that was entirely fabricated. Naomi closed her laptop and stood up, adjusting the lapels of her flawless charcoal suit. She looked at the monitors one last time, her expression completely devoid of mercy. They have had their fun. I grabbed my car keys and smoothed the fabric of my crimson silk dress. It was time to crash the party. The coastal drive took less than 10 minutes. I pulled my sleek sedan right up to the valet stand, completely bypassing the long line of waiting luxury vehicles. The young valet hesitated, glancing at his clipboard. But the absolute authority in my gaze made him take the keys without a single word of protest. Naomi stepped out of the passenger side, adjusting the lapels of her flawless charcoal suit. It was a perfectly lethal contrast to my flowing crimson silk dress. We did not speak. We just walked side by side up the cedar steps, our heels clicking in a sharp, synchronized rhythm against the wood. The massive glass double doors were propped wide open to let in the salty ocean breeze. A string quartet played a lively classical piece in the corner of the living room, masking the initial sound of our approach. We stepped over the threshold and into the breathtaking chaos of my stolen home. The sheer volume of people packed into the space was staggering. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the smell of catered seafood. Yet the crowd parted instinctively as we moved forward. Pure, unadulterated power has a specific gravity. And right now, Naomi and I were pulling all the oxygen out of the room. We glided straight toward the center of the open floor plan. A wealthy socialite caught mid-sentence, dropped her jaw as she stared at us. A few heads turned, then a dozen more. The confused murmurs began to ripple outward like a physical wave spreading from the kitchen to the outdoor patio. The lead violinist of the quartet noticed the sudden uncomfortable shift in the room's energy and faltered. The music sputtered and died completely, leaving only the sound of crashing waves outside and the nervous clinking of crystal glasses. Barbara was standing near the jagged remains of the destroyed load-bearing wall, holding court with a group of country club wives. When the music stopped, she turned her head in visible annoyance. Her eyes landed on me. The color instantly drained from her face, leaving her chalky and pale before a violent, furious shade of red rushed up her neck. She dropped her elegant host facade entirely. "What are you doing here?" Barbara shrieked, her high-pitched voice echoing terribly through the silent vaulted ceiling. "How did you even get past the gate?" The crowd parted further, revealing Preston. He was standing near the edge of the patio, a cigar dangling limply from his fingers. He looked completely paralyzed, his eyes darting between me and the very wife he thought was safely sitting in a corporate boardroom. "Preston," Barbara commanded, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at us. "Throw them out! Throw them out right now! She is trespassing. Both of them are trespassing. Get them out of my house!" I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply walked past my seething mother and approached the towering, ridiculous champagne fountain the caterers had set up in the center of my kitchen island. Naomi stood firmly at my back like a heavily armed guard. I picked up a pristine crystal flute, held it under the cascading stream of expensive alcohol, and let it fill to the brim. I brought the glass to my lips, took a slow, deliberate sip, and smiled. I looked directly at Preston, who was now sweating profusely under his designer suit. "I am not trespassing," I said calmly, my voice carrying clearly across the dead silent room. "I am just enjoying the catering at my own house." A collective gasp rippled through the sea of designer resort wear. The utter audacity of my statement hung in the heavy, perfumed air. 50 high society guests who had just spent the last 2 hours drinking my expensive champagne and listening to my parents brag were now staring at me in absolute breathless shock. The string quartet remained frozen in the corner, their bows hovering inches above their instruments. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Barbara screeched, her voice cracking under the strain of her sudden fury. She took a step toward me, her manicured hands curled into tight fists. "You delusional, jealous girl. Richard, call the police right now. Have her arrested for breaking and entering." Richard reached into his pocket for his phone. His face twisted in an ugly scowl. But before his fingers could even grasp the device, Naomi stepped forward. She moved with the predatory grace of a senior litigator entering a hostile courtroom. She reached into her sleek silver briefcase and withdrew a thick, heavy manila envelope. She handed it directly to me without breaking eye contact with my father. I set my crystal champagne flute down on the marble island. The crisp clink of the glass against the stone was the only sound in the dead, silent room. I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of heavy, watermarked parchment paper. The official gold seal of the state of California gleamed under the recessed kitchen lighting. I did not just hand the papers to my parents. I lifted my arm and dropped the heavy, certified documents directly onto the center of the kitchen island with a resounding, authoritative smack. "These are the certified articles of incorporation and the operating agreement for Ocean Crest Holdings, LLC. I announced, my voice projecting clearly and effortlessly across the open floor plan. I made sure every single guest on the patio could hear every word. "This is the corporate entity that holds the exclusive legal title to this estate. If anyone in this room cares to examine the second page, you will see my name listed as the sole managing member and the 100% equity owner. There are no other partners. There are no hidden investors. I purchased this property entirely with my own corporate severance package. I am the sole owner." The silence that followed was deafening. The wealthy country club wives who had just been praising Barbara for her brilliant parenting began exchanging horrified, wide-eyed glances. The socialites instinctively took a collective step backward, physically and socially distancing themselves from my mother. The whispers began immediately, a low, buzzing hum of scandalized realization sweeping through the crowd. Preston looked like he was going to vomit. Sweat beaded on his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled hair. He frantically grabbed his leather portfolio from the nearby counter, his hands shaking so violently he could barely unzip it. "She is lying," Preston shouted, his voice pitching into a desperate, frantic register. "It is a trick. She printed those out to confuse you. I have the real deed right here. I brokered the deal myself." He yanked his fake California grant deed out of the portfolio and held it up like a shield. I looked at the flimsy piece of paper and let out a cold, sharp laugh. "Go ahead, Preston," I challenged, taking a step toward him. "Show your parents' country club friends the document you printed off a random legal blog. Show them the glaring formatting errors. Show them the gold foil sticker you bought at a craft store. Tell them about the signature of David Thorne, the fictional executive you entirely invented because you did not realize I was the actual owner of the holding company." Richard stared at the deed in his son's shaking hands, his complexion turning a sickly ashen gray. "Preston, what is she talking about?" Richard demanded, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. "Tell them she is crazy. We wired the money to the escrow account. We have the receipt." Naomi decided it was time to introduce herself properly to the audience. She stepped up beside me, radiating absolute legal authority. "For those of you who do not know me, I am Naomi, a senior financial attorney at one of the top corporate law firms in Los Angeles. I am also, regrettably, Preston's wife." The crowd murmured in shock again. Preston looked at Naomi with wide, terrified eyes, finally realizing that she was not at a weekend work retreat. She was the architect of his demise, as an officer of the court and an expert in corporate mergers. "I can assure everyone in this room that the document my husband is holding is a laughable, pathetic forgery," Naomi stated, her voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. "Preston is not a real estate prodigy. He is a desperate, chronically unemployed gambling addict. Barbara let out a strangled, breathless sound. She grabbed Richard's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit jacket. "This is a setup," Barbara stammered, looking wildly around the room at her judging guests. "They are trying to ruin us. We paid $1.5 million. You did not pay for a house." "Mom," I said, delivering the crushing, inescapable truth. "You wired your entire life savings into a Delaware shell company that Preston set up 3 weeks ago. There was no escrow account. From Delaware. Your brilliant son washed your money through an Eastern European cryptocurrency exchange and dumped it directly into an anonymous offshore account in the Cayman Islands." The whispers among the guests erupted into a loud, chaotic hum of utter disbelief. The wealthy elite of my parents' social circle were now openly staring at Barbara and Richard with profound disgust and pity. They realized they were standing inside a stolen house drinking champagne paid for by stolen funds, attending a housewarming party hosted by victims of a massive familial fraud. "Where is our money, Preston?" Richard roared, suddenly lunging toward his son. The polished, wealthy patriarch facade completely evaporated, replaced by the primal panic of a man who realized he was entirely destitute. "Tell me where the money is right now." Preston backed away, bumping hard into the caterer's table. A tray of delicate hors d'oeuvres crashed to the floor, shattering perfectly in the tense atmosphere. "The money is fine," Preston stammered, his eyes darting frantically toward the glass doors as if calculating an escape route. "It is just an investment. I was going to pay you back with the returns." "He lost it," Naomi interjected coldly. "He owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to underground betting syndicates. He used your retirement funds to pay off aggressive loan sharks and save his own kneecaps. He stole your money because he had already drained my personal bank accounts, and he knew I was preparing to serve him with divorce papers." Barbara let out a piercing, agonizing scream. Her legs gave out from under her, and she collapsed onto the floor of my kitchen, weeping hysterically into her hands. The fabulous, arrogant woman who had threatened to throw me out on the street 24 hours ago was now a crumpled mess crying on my imported hardwood floors. The guests began grabbing their designer purses and making a rapid, highly uncomfortable mass exodus toward the front door. Nobody wanted to be associated with this level of catastrophic social and financial ruin. The grand housewarming party was disintegrating in real time, transforming into a humiliating, highly public spectacle of total devastation. I stood perfectly still watching my parents' world burn to the ground. They had blindly trusted the golden child, and he had dragged them straight into hell. Preston stood frozen amid the wreckage of his shattered ego. The remaining guests were practically trampling each other to reach the front door, eager to escape the radioactive fallout of our family disaster. The clinking of abandoned champagne flutes and the frantic whispering of a country club elite formed a chaotic symphony of ruin. I watched my brother realize that his grand, carefully orchestrated illusion had completely evaporated. He was no longer the brilliant financial prodigy. He was a cornered animal, exposed and utterly defenseless. His eyes darted wildly around the kitchen landing on the certified corporate documents resting on the marble island. Then his gaze snapped to me. The sheer panic in his expression rapidly morphed into something much more dangerous. It was raw, unadulterated, primal rage. He had spent his entire life being coddled, protected, and elevated above me. The realization that I was the architect of his absolute destruction finally broke whatever fragile restraint he had left. "You ruined everything," Preston snarled, his voice guttural and dripping with venom. "You set me up. You planned this just to humiliate me because you have always been a jealous, bitter failure." He lunged forward, his hands curled into tight, violent fists aiming directly for me. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I had anticipated a physical outburst from a man who had just lost $1 million and his freedom in the span of 5 minutes. Naomi immediately shifted her stance, preparing to intercept him. but neither of us needed to raise a hand. Before Preston could clear the space between the kitchen island and my position, a deafening screech of heavy tires tore through the coastal air. The sound of multiple high-powered engines roaring down the private access road violently interrupted his attack. Through the expansive open-glass doors of the living room, I watched three massive, heavily armored black SUVs skid to a halt on the crushed stone driveway, completely blocking the exit of the fleeing catering vans and luxury sedans. The heavy doors of the SUVs swung open with aggressive synchronized precision. Over a dozen men and women wearing tactical gear and dark windbreakers emblazoned with bold yellow FBI lettering swarmed out of the vehicles. They moved with absolute terrifying efficiency, fanning out across the manicured lawn and surging up the cedar steps. Federal agents, nobody move. A booming authoritative voice commanded, echoing through the vaulted ceilings of my architectural estate. Keep your hands visible and step away from the exits. The remaining high society guests shrieked in genuine terror. Wealthy socialites dropped their designer purses and pressed themselves against the far walls, completely horrified by the sudden aggressive intrusion of federal law enforcement into their exclusive afternoon gathering. Barbara, still weeping on the hardwood floor, let out a piercing scream of pure panic, burying her face in her hands. Richard stood paralyzed near the wet bar, his face completely drained of blood, looking like a man who had just witnessed a ghost. Agent Harrison strode confidently through the front door, his badge prominently displayed on his belt. His sharp, calculating eyes immediately scanned the chaotic scene, locking onto me for a fraction of a second to confirm the situation was under control, before pivoting his lethal focus entirely onto my brother. Preston Henderson. Agent Harrison announced, his voice slicing through the terrified whimpers of the crowd. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, interstate money laundering, and the forgery of legal real estate documents. Preston's bravado vanished instantly. The arrogant, wealthy investor persona melted away, leaving behind a terrified, desperate criminal. He looked at the armed federal agents surrounding him, then looked at the open patio doors leading out to the beach staircase. In a final spectacularly foolish display of panic, Preston turned and bolted toward the ocean view deck. He did not even make it 3 steps. 2 federal agents intercepted his clumsy escape attempt with ruthless practice speed. One agent grabbed Preston by the shoulder of his expensive designer suit, twisting him around, while the second agent kicked the back of his knees, sending him crashing hard onto the polished cedar decking. The sickening thud of his body hitting the wood reverberated across the patio. It was a poetic, perfectly satisfying location for his takedown, right next to the jagged, exposed drywall of the load-bearing wall he had maliciously destroyed yesterday. "Get off me!" Preston wailed, struggling pathetically against the weight of the federal agents pinning him to the ground. "I did not do anything. My parents gave me that money. It was a gift. They are lying." The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting shut around his wrists cut off his frantic lies. The agents hauled him roughly to his feet, ignoring his desperate protests. They marched him back inside the house, forcing him to stand in the center of the kitchen island, completely restrained, surrounded by the horrified, staring faces of my parents' wealthy country club friends. The absolute public humiliation was profound. The golden child was being paraded like a common thief in front of the very audience he had invited to witness his triumph. Agent Harrison pulled a folded warrant from his jacket pocket and handed it to one of his deputies, instructing them to begin securing any electronic devices, cell phones, and laptops found on the premises. The net had officially closed. I stood silently next to the marble counter, watching the glorious, undeniable execution of justice. But the performance was not quite over. Naomi had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. She smoothed the front of her impeccable charcoal pantsuit, picked up her sleek silver briefcase from the counter, and walked slowly toward her handcuffed husband. The crowd held its collective breath. Richard and Barbara watched in stunned silence as their daughter-in-law, a senior corporate attorney, approached the federal custody scene with a look of terrifying, absolute calm. Preston looked at Naomi, a flicker of desperate hope returning to his panicked eyes. "Naomi, tell them he begged, his voice cracking. "Tell them this is a mistake. Call the partners at your firm. We need the best defense attorneys right now. Fix this." Naomi stopped just inches away from him. She did not raise her voice. She did not yell. She simply looked at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out the thick blue-bound legal document we had prepared in the coffee shop bunker. "I am not your defense attorney, Preston," Naomi stated, her voice carrying a lethal, icy clarity that made the federal agents pause and watch the exchange. "I am your victim. You stole $400,000 from my personal earnings to fund your pathetic gambling addiction. You compromised my home network to launder money you stole from your elderly parents. You brought federal agents to my doorstep." Preston stared at her, his jaw hanging slack, completely unable to process the betrayal. Naomi lifted the heavy blue document and slid it effortlessly into the breast pocket of Preston's ruined designer suit jacket. "You have been legally served," she announced coldly. "These are the finalized documents for the dissolution of our marriage, including a fault-based civil lawsuit for the financial damages you caused me. My legal team will freeze every single asset bearing your name by tomorrow morning. I am taking the house, the cars, and whatever dignity you have left. Do not ever contact me again." She turned her back on him instantly, walking away with the fierce, untouchable posture of a woman who had just excised a malignant tumor from her life. She took her place back beside me, a silent, powerful sentinel of justice. Preston sagged against the grip of the federal agents, his spirit visibly breaking as the totality of his destruction crashed down upon him. He had lost his fake millions. He had lost his freedom. He had lost his brilliant wife. And he had lost his unearned, inflated reputation in front of the most judgmental audience possible. "Take him out of here," Agent Harrison ordered, gesturing toward the front door. The agents shoved Preston forward, marching him past the shattered champagne fountain and out into the glaring Malibu sunlight straight toward the waiting black SUVs. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the driveway, casting long, harsh shadows across my property. I watched my brother disappear into the back of a federal vehicle, exactly where he belonged. The immediate threat was gone, but the aftermath of his radioactive greed remained. I turned my attention back to the center of the room. Barbara and Richard were still huddled on the floor. Their country club friends had fled to the edges of the property, and the stark, brutal reality of their situation was finally beginning to set in. The federal raid had successfully removed the parasite, but now I had to deal with the people who had nurtured him. The few remaining party guests stood completely paralyzed near the edges of the room. They were forced to witness the utter collapse of a family they had envied just an hour ago. Richard remained glued to the floor near the shattered remnants of the champagne fountain. Barbara knelt on the hardwood floor beside him, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders heaving with ragged, uncontrollable sobs. The illusion of their massive wealth and superior intellect had been violently stripped away, leaving them completely exposed. Agent Harrison approached them with heavy, measured steps. He did not offer a comforting hand. He simply pulled a fresh folder from his tactical vest and looked down at my parents with absolute clinical detachment. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson," Agent Harrison began, his voice projecting clearly across the silent room so every remaining country club guest could hear the brutal truth. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are currently the victims of a massive coordinated federal wire fraud scheme orchestrated by your son." Richard blinked with hollow, desperate eyes. "But we have the deed." Richard stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of his denial. "Preston bought us this house. He negotiated the deal. The money is in escrow. We saw the paperwork. The paperwork your son provided you is a complete fabrication. You did not buy a house in Malibu today. Sir, this property legally belongs to your daughter Gemma under a highly secured corporate holding company. Preston used her vacant rental home as a physical prop to convince you to liquidate your assets." Barbara lifted her tear-stained face. "No, that cannot be true," she wailed, her voice echoing painfully through the vaulted ceilings. "We wired him $1.5 million. Our entire life savings, the sale of our suburban estate. He told us it was a direct transfer to the seller." Harrison pulled out the exact financial tracing documents Naomi and I had meticulously prepared in my hotel suite. "You did not wire a single dime to a legitimate real estate holding company," Harrison stated, dropping the brutal reality directly onto them. "You wired your entire net worth into a Delaware shell company called Apex Global Ventures, which your son registered 3 weeks ago for $50. From there, he immediately washed your life savings through an Eastern European cryptocurrency exchange and dumped the funds into an anonymous offshore account in the Cayman Islands." The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit Richard like a physical blow. He staggered backward, clutching the edge of the marble kitchen island for support. He gasped for air, his chest heaving as the crushing reality began to set in. "The Cayman Islands," Richard repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Our money is in the Cayman Islands, but you can get it back. Right. You are the FBI. You can freeze the account and reverse the transfer." Naomi stepped forward, her charcoal suit immaculate, her expression completely devoid of pity. "The federal government has already frozen the offshore account, Richard," Naomi explained, delivering the financial death blow. "But the account is not full. Your son is a chronic, desperate gambling addict. He owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to violent underground betting syndicates. The second your money hit that offshore account, he started aggressively paying off his massive debts to save his own life. The money is gone." Barbara let out a piercing, agonizing scream that chilled my blood. She grabbed fistfuls of her own hair, rocking back and forth on the floor in pure, unadulterated anguish. "Our house," Barbara sobbed hysterically. "We sold our beautiful home. We sold everything we worked 40 years for. We gave it all to him. We have nothing left. We are homeless." The wealthy socialites who had stayed behind whispered amongst themselves, their eyes wide with profound horror. They were watching a prominent, arrogant couple realize they had willfully handed their entire future to a criminal and were now entirely destitute. "You gave him everything because you thought he was better than me," I said quietly, stepping into their line of sight. My voice was calm, but the words carried the weight of 34 years of emotional neglect. "You liquidated your entire existence because you blindly trusted a man who has never held a job simply because he was your golden child. You let him convince you that I was a failure, and you were so eager to believe it that you walked straight into his trap." Richard looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic pleading I had never seen before. "Gemma, please," he begged, tears finally spilling over his wrinkled cheeks. "You have to help us. We have nowhere to go. We have no money. You own this house. You have to let us stay here. We are your parents." Agent Harrison cleared his throat, interrupting my father's pathetic plea. "Actually, sir, that brings us to the final matter of business. You and your wife are currently trespassing on private property. The owner of this estate has not authorized your presence, and you have caused significant malicious structural damage to the premises by removing a load-bearing wall without a permit." Harrison pointed toward the jagged, gaping hole in the drywall that Preston and Richard had enthusiastically smashed with sledgehammers just a few days ago. "You are facing severe civil liability for the destruction of this property," Harrison continued relentlessly. "And because you have no legal right to occupy this residence, I am officially instructing you to vacate the premises immediately. If you refuse to leave, my deputies will place you under arrest for criminal trespassing." The absolute, crushing totality of their ruin settled over the room. Barbara and Richard had not just lost their money. They had lost their home, their social standing, their golden child, and any remaining shred of their dignity. They were standing in the wreckage of a life they had destroyed with their own toxic favoritism. They had bet their entire existence on Preston, and the house had finally won. I stood perfectly still, watching my parents process the horrifying fact that they were completely at my mercy. I had the power to save them. I had the financial means to shelter them. But after a lifetime of being treated like a disposable asset, I had absolutely no intention of offering them a lifeline. They had made their choices, and now they were going to have to live with the absolute devastating consequences. Barbara dragged herself forward across the polished oak floor, closing the short distance between us. Her expensive white linen dress was now wrinkled and stained with spilled champagne. She reached out with trembling manicured hands and desperately grabbed the fabric of my crimson silk dress. She was physically on her knees looking up at me with a face entirely destroyed by panic and smeared mascara. "Gemma, please," Barbara wailed, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched sob. "You are my daughter, my sweet, beautiful girl. You cannot let them throw us out into the street. We have absolutely nothing left. Your brother took everything. We have no money, no retirement, no home. You have to let us stay here. We are family. Blood is thicker than water." I looked down at the woman who had spent 34 years treating me like an emotional punching bag. I calmly reached down, grasped her wrists, and physically removed her hands from my dress. I took a deliberate step back, severing the physical connection. "Blood is what you share with Preston," I replied, my voice echoing like ice through the silent, cavernous room. "And look exactly where your precious bloodline got you. You enabled a monster, and he rewarded you by completely ruining your life. Richard, the man who had constantly belittled my career and mocked my independence, suddenly fell to his knees right beside his wife. The proud, arrogant patriarch was entirely shattered. He clasped his hands together in a gesture of pure, unadulterated begging. "Gemma, I am begging you," Richard pleaded, his voice thick with tears. "We were wrong. We were so incredibly wrong about everything. Just let us stay in the guest house. We will not bother you. We will stay out of your way. You have so much room here. We just need a roof over our heads until we can figure something out. Please, Gemma, have some mercy." I stared at my father, feeling absolutely zero pity. "Mercy?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "That is a fascinating word for you to use. Where was your mercy yesterday morning when you stood in my kitchen and called the police to violently evict me? Where was your mercy when you told me I was a bitter, failed spinster who deserved to be thrown out in her pajamas? Where was your mercy when you watched Preston threaten me, knowing full well you were enabling my eviction from the very home I worked 80-hour weeks to afford?" They had no answer. They simply kneeled on my floor, sobbing and trembling under the crushing weight of their own monumental hypocrisy. "You did not care if I was homeless," I continued, my voice carrying the lethal precision of an auditor delivering a final damning report. "You were perfectly happy to toss me out into the street to secure your own luxury. You bragged to your friends about stripping away my stability. You tore down my walls with a sledgehammer and mocked my life choices. You chose your side." I leaned down slightly, bringing my face level with my weeping mother. I locked eyes with her, ensuring she felt the absolute inescapable finality of my decision. "When you called me on the phone to brag about taking my home, you made your position incredibly clear," I said softly, enunciating every single syllable. "You told me you were taking the master bedroom. You told me to pack my bags. And you told me if you do not like it, you can find somewhere else." Barbara gasped, her face in her hands as her own venomous words were weaponized directly against her. "Well, Mom," I whispered coldly, "I highly suggest you go find somewhere else." I stood back up and turned my attention to Agent Harrison. "I am officially requesting that these trespassers be removed from my property," I stated clearly. Harrison offered a sharp professional nod. He signaled to the 2 local Malibu sheriff deputies who had arrived alongside the federal raid team. The deputies stepped forward, their hands resting firmly on their utility belts. "All right, folks. It is time to go," the older deputy commanded, grabbing Richard by the arm and hauling the broken man to his feet. "You heard the property owner. You have zero legal right to be here. Move toward the door." The younger deputy pulled Barbara up from the floor. She shrieked and flailed, dragging her feet across the hardwood as she was physically escorted toward the exit. She looked wildly toward her wealthy country club friends, desperate for someone, anyone to intervene. But her high society peers simply turned their backs, refusing to make eye contact. Utterly disgusted by the entire pathetic spectacle, nobody wanted to be associated with financial ruin. Richard and Barbara were marched out of my living room, past the shattered, leaking champagne fountain, and out the heavy mahogany front doors. I stood shoulder to shoulder with Naomi, watching as my parents were paraded down the front steps in complete and total disgrace. They had arrived at this house feeling like royalty, and they were leaving it as penniless trespassers. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind them, locking them out of my sanctuary and out of my life forever. 6 months passed, washing over my life like the steady cleansing tide of the Pacific Ocean. I sat on the expansive cedar deck of my Malibu sanctuary, the afternoon sun warming my skin, a crystal glass of expensive Pinot Noir resting lightly in my hand. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and blooming bougainvillea, completely untainted by the toxic presence of the people who used to call themselves my family. Bailey, my golden retriever, rested his head happily on my feet, basking in the tranquil coastal warmth. Naomi sat across from me looking absolutely radiant in a relaxed, tailored linen suit. She held her own glass of wine, leaning back against the plush outdoor cushions with the effortless grace of a woman who had just conquered her entire world. We clinked our glasses together, the delicate chime ringing out over the sound of the crashing waves. We were not just celebrating a beautiful Saturday afternoon. We were celebrating absolute, undisputed victory. The federal justice system moves with terrifying efficiency when handed a perfectly constructed, undeniable dossier. Preston did not even make it to a trial. Faced with the mountain of forensic accounting evidence, the fraudulent deed, and his own crystal-clear audio confession, his public defender forced him to accept a plea agreement. It was a complete, humiliating surrender. He pleaded guilty to federal wire fraud, international money laundering, and elder financial abuse. Right now, the former golden child of our family was residing in a federal correctional institution in the desert. He was serving a mandatory 7-year sentence. There were no luxury cars, no offshore accounts, and absolutely no wealthy investors to impress. His daily routine consisted of waking up at dawn, wearing a standard issue uniform, and working in the prison laundry facility for pennies an hour. The man who had mocked me for working 80-hour weeks was now spending the prime years of his life taking orders from federal guards. He had gambled his entire existence on his own inflated ego, and he had lost everything. Naomi had executed her own legal warfare with devastating precision. Her divorce was finalized with record speed. Because Preston had committed massive financial crimes and drained their marital assets to fund his illegal gambling rings, the judge granted Naomi everything. She retained full ownership of their Los Angeles home, her impressive investment portfolios, and her dignity. Furthermore, her brilliant handling of the situation had caught the attention of the senior managing partners at her law firm. Last month, Naomi was officially promoted to senior partner, cementing her status as one of the most formidable financial attorneys in the state. She was thriving completely unshackled from the dead weight of my brother. The fate of Barbara and Richard was entirely different and brutally poetic. The federal agents had successfully seized Preston's offshore accounts, but Naomi's initial assessment had been entirely correct. The vast majority of my parents' $1, $5 million had already been distributed to violent underground loan sharks to cover Preston's massive debts. The money was gone, vanished into the untraceable void of organized crime. My parents were left with absolutely nothing. The grand, wealthy lifestyle they had weaponized against me for 34 years evaporated overnight. Their country club friends, the same people who had witnessed their humiliating eviction from my beach house, completely blacklisted them. Nobody in their elite suburban circle wanted anything to do with a couple who had been defrauded by their own son and publicly exposed as toxic, manipulative abusers, without a home, without savings, and without any marketable skills. Barbara and Richard were forced to face the harsh, unforgiving reality of the working class they had always so arrogantly looked down upon. They currently rented a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a noisy, run-down neighborhood in the San Fernando Valley. It was a bleak, depressing complex overlooking a busy freeway intersection, a stark contrast to the sprawling suburban estates they were accustomed to pay their rent and cover their basic living expenses. My parents had to swallow their massive pride and enter the retail workforce. At 60 years old, Richard was currently working as a greeter at a massive discount warehouse store. He spent 8 hours a day standing on concrete floors, checking receipts, and handing out shopping carts to the very people he used to mock. Barbara had found employment as a cashier at a mid-tier department store. The woman who used to boast about her designer wardrobes now wore a polyester uniform and a plastic name tag, spending her days folding clothes and dealing with demanding customers. They were living paycheck to paycheck, exhausted, isolated, and entirely consumed by the consequences of their own toxic favoritism. I had not spoken a single word to either of them since the day the police escorted them off my property. They had attempted to reach out a few times, sending pathetic, desperate letters begging for financial assistance or a second chance. I returned every single letter unopened, marked return to sender. I had finally learned the most vital lesson of my life. My peace was infinitely more valuable than their comfort. Inside my home, the physical scars of their invasion had been completely erased. I hired a team of licensed, highly skilled contractors to repair the massive hole Preston and Richard had smashed into my house. Instead of rebuilding the solid cedar wall, I had them install a stunning floor-to-ceiling structural glass partition reinforced with architectural steel. It opened up the space beautifully, safely, and legally, allowing the ocean light to flood into the formal dining room. It was a daily physical reminder that I could take the damage they inflicted on me and transform it into something stronger and more beautiful. I had not returned to the grueling corporate grind in Chicago. Instead, I launched my own boutique auditing consultancy right here from my beach house. I took on only the clients I wanted, worked the hours I chose, and built my wealth on my own terms. I had regained my health, my sanity, and my absolute independence. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting brilliant streaks of orange and purple across the Pacific sky, Naomi raised her glass one more time. "To new beginnings," she said, her smile genuine and warm. "To peace," I replied, clinking my glass against hers. We sat in companionable silence watching the waves roll in. The journey had been brutal, but it had taught me an undeniable truth. Blood does not automatically entitle anyone to your loyalty, your resources, or your sanity. You are allowed to set firm, impenetrable boundaries. You are allowed to walk away from people who only view you as an asset to be exploited, even if those people are your own parents. True family is not determined by a birth certificate. It is determined by mutual respect, genuine support, and unconditional care. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and cut toxic family members out of your life to protect your own peace? Have you ever watched the people who tried to destroy you face the undeniable consequences of their own actions? Share your experiences and your victories in the comments section below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about reclaiming your power, setting unbreakable boundaries, and thriving against all odds. Remember, Your peace is your most valuable asset. Never let anyone convince you to give it away. The story of Gemma's ultimate triumph over her family's breathtaking betrayal serves as a powerful testament to the necessity of self-preservation and boundary setting. For far too long, society has peddled the romanticized narrative that blood is thicker than water, a phrase frequently weaponized to imply that biological ties demand unconditional loyalty, even in the face of profound emotional or financial abuse. However, the most crucial lesson embedded in this narrative is that shared DNA does not automatically grant anyone a VIP pass to exploit your resources, manipulate your sanity, or disregard your well-being. Gemma spent her entire life being treated as an expendable asset, an emotional and financial safety net, while her brother was continually placed on a pedestal. When her parents willingly sacrificed her security for the illusion of their golden child's success, they demonstrated that their love was deeply transactional. The true turning point of the story wasn't simply Gemma and Naomi uncovering the offshore wire fraud. It was Gemma's quiet internal realization that she no longer owed her abusers a lifeline. We frequently harbor crushing guilt when contemplating cutting ties with toxic family members, conditioned to believe we must endure the unbearable simply because they are family. Yet true healing requires radical self-respect. It demands the courage to meticulously build a life on your own terms, and the unyielding fortitude to lock the door against those who only seek to tear your foundation down. Gemma's ultimate victory wasn't just putting her brother behind federal bars or physically reclaiming her Malibu home. It was the profound, quiet peace she found at the end, completely free from the obligation to save people who never truly valued her. Healing truly begins the moment you accept that your peace is non-negotiable. Take a moment today to evaluate the relationships draining your energy and dare to set the firm boundaries